Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast that explores our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. I'm recording this from the Gila River Valley. I'm looking out the window of my friend Calibri's straw bale studio space. Calibri runs the Voices for Nature and Peace podcast, and it's a cloudy, windy day. A cold front has moved in, and the desert willow is moving in the wind, and mesquite cracking, hens also out the window. A handful of friendly deer eating in the valley, eating the little sprouts coming up ever so slowly this late winter, early spring moment right now. And a couple sandhill cranes are out there, and see some mistletoe in the cottonwoods along the ditch. Some sycamores still holding on to their seeds, and Tura all around the building right outside the window, and many of them still holding on to their seeds and their little spiky pods. It's a little bit of a picture of the moment of where I am right now. It's mid-February. I'm about to head to the Winter Count Primitive Skills Gathering. I don't know if I'll air this before I go or after, but that gathering will be in southern Arizona. So it'll be really nice to reunite with a bunch of friends that I haven't seen in a while, because I often go to these kinds of things so I can see my people who are spread out far and wide. It's an excuse to drive long distances to meet up. So I'm excited for that community time after a really intense year. And hang out with friends in the desert and do some weaving and catching up with people, and medicine making hopefully this spring. I'm taking it slow with that right now. I'm definitely hoping to work on making a batch of cottonwood bud salve and desert salve. For folks who are big fans of the Ground Shots Herbs Apothecary, I'm not going big right now on anything related to that, but I'm hoping to slowly create that salve, because I do it every year somehow. So I'm about out of my old salve batches and oils. So here I am in the desert, and I'm gonna be, as it feels right, collecting the ingredients for that salve, and maybe I'll have extra share, and I'll let y'all know here if I do. This episode of the podcast is with an old friend, a dear old friend, Ted Packard, Theodore Packard. And some folks who listen to the podcast maybe have known both of us a pretty long time, maybe just a few listeners, but the people who have are probably giddy with excitement to listen to this episode, and the people who haven't have no idea what they're about to get into. And so that's why I'm excited to share this episode. I'm just so excited to share this episode because Ted and I in a room together, there's a lot of cool things that come out, and a little backstory. I mean, we'll tell a lot of the story of, well, we don't really fully go into the story of he and I's more intimate connection, although that could be a content for another whole episode. But we do tell aspects of our shared story together, but a lot of this is about our shared ideas and sort of a like, where are you now in the world and in life 15 years later from when we first met. So a little backstory is that Ted and I met when I was about 18 or 19 years old. I had just moved from South Hill, Virginia, my hometown, to Newport News, Virginia, to go to college. Christopher Newport University is where we both went to college, and I met him after the first semester of being there. I was kind of trying to find my people. I didn't really know who my people were. I was such a weirdo kid in my hometown and didn't really fit in there, and always kind of questioned things and had interests that no one else had, and wanted to do things no one wanted to join me doing, and was really creative and all of these things. And I had gone through a pretty traumatic year, my senior year of high school, getting arrested for vandalizing my principal's front yard and having to do community service for it and a lot of other things, and my friends and I having a big falling out. So I pretty much just left high school with no friends and went to college, starting over. Lucky I even got into college in some ways. And although I did very well in college, as we'll talk about, our college experience in this episode, one of many things that we touch on. When we met, Ted was a part of this Frisbee club and sort of pagan community on the college campus that wore all these colorful clothing, tie-dye, head to toe, wore barefoot all the time. There wasn't exactly a sort of neoliberal hippie kind of culture at the school exactly. It's just that this little crew of people that he was a part of were really into Frisbee, ultimate Frisbee, and really liked to dress a certain way and cause havoc sometimes around campus. And I would see Ted walking around with like Tool t-shirts on and listening to music. And so I ended up befriending this group of people. After a while, they would invite me to some of their little potlucks and gatherings and stuff. And my friend Lindsay, who's been on the podcast many moons ago in the beginning, she is someone who I featured out of Richmond, Virginia. Scroll all the way back down to that if you want to listen to her episode about trauma-informed counsel for children in Richmond, Virginia. And a lot has changed in Richmond since we also recorded that episode, especially our talk about the statues, the Confederate monuments, which have now come down. Lindsay was a part of that whole crew too, but she was sort of the girl that wore all black in the sea of colorful, seemingly bohemian cis boys, cisgendered boys, and we all started to hang out, and I came to discover that this crew of people were very eclectic and not like what it seemed like on the surface, like deadheady types or something. That wasn't actually the case at all. And I ended up getting kind of my people, I ended up finding like a group of people who really I resonated with in our exploration of ideas about the world and life and spirit and the body and nature and right relations with the world and each other. And this became the beginning of an ongoing, unfolding exploration that really was softened by and cushioned by this group of people that I became friends with in my college years, my early 20s. And we did a lot of work together in a way, in this sense. And Ted and I became friends at that time. And then eventually we did start dating, and we dated for 2 years. And he's pretty much like the first love, the person that I first really connected with. And I'd say that I haven't deeply connected with that many people in my life, and Ted has been one of those people. And we spent a lot of our time together walking in the woods and going to libraries, researching things that we're really into. And so we'll talk about stuff like that on the episode as well. So over the years, we have stayed friends and have had we've had lives that have, despite like really not being in each other's lives that much for many years, we have lived in a way where like the things that we really explored and talked about when we were in our early 20s became reality for us into our 20s, and we're both in our 30s now. So, and we lived in different places and got to see each other every now and then, and what we unfolded and blossomed in our lives became things that still resonated. They had their own lives and journeys. And so Ted went to Alderleaf Wilderness School and then Wilderness Awareness School, and then ended up teaching for Wilderness Awareness School for a while, as well as offering other nature-based skills programs for kids, mentoring programs in the Seattle area or greater Seattle area and Puget Sound area for many years. And his work has really focused on that. And we'll go into in this episode a lot more of what kind of where that work for him connects to all his other interests and what he feels like is important to see in the world and to like really sit with in the world today. And we kind of do a big like, okay, 10 to 15 years later, I mean, I guess we met each other in 2005. So however many years that is, we do like so what do you know now compared to what we knew then? And it's a pretty unique episode in that sense of how long he and I have known each other and ways that we've really encouraged each other's growth. And really, I spent a month with him and his partner Annika in January. And when I was doing the Colorado Trail Plan to Go project with Gabe, Ted and Annika came and resupplied us at one point and spent the day with us. And so they've been around in my life a little bit more the past couple years than I've had in the last decade. And so it was a really sweet treat to sit down with Ted and have this conversation. There's a lot of show notes for this episode because we talk about a lot of different things, like people that we thought about, thinkers in college. And so I tried to write those down and put those linked in the show notes in some form, as well as other kinds of links. In this conversation with Ted, we basically talk about Ted's nature connection work with youth in Washington and Colorado, and Ted's upbringing in Northwestern Virginia. Ted and I's experiences of community in college, as I mentioned earlier a little bit, artists, philosophers, musicians, activists, and neo-pagans. We were really an eclectic group. We speak about seasonal ritual as a somatic map. We talk about ways that Ted's anger at ecocidal culture has transformed over the years to a yearning for finding points of connection with people and place. We talk about what is a community of mutuality in a broken society that emphasizes hyper-individualism. We talk about the awareness of the isolation of capitalism and how it's often really crippling. We speak to the reality that financial security is generally not available to our generation as millennials and what we feel about that. We talk about Ted's musical projects, including a project called Momentary Prophets from his early 20s that had a coyote-troubadour elements to it and was a community-driven instigation. We talk about how paying attention to nature, in quotes, brings you closer to crazy synchronicities that become signposts to either keep going or make a different decision in life. And Ted gives some stories and examples of how these things happen for him in really poignant ways. We talk about the weaving of a web of interrelating and ideas and ecologies, something that on the Ground Shots podcast here and in the Ground Shots project on the whole is something that I'm always striving to do. We talk about trauma, neutrinos, quantum physics, intersecting Eastern philosophy, bodies as multiplicity, the mycelium network, and nature of everything, and a lot more. So in this episode with Ted, I really hope y'all enjoy it. It's a long one, as Ted and I are old friends and have a lot to talk about with each other, a lot of really interesting connections to make. And if you're a philosophy geek or a nature geek, this is a good episode to listen through, and I really hope you enjoy it. This podcast is listener funded, and the primary ways that we fund this podcast are through Patreon and listener funded donations through PayPal or Venmo or Cash App. And those links are always on the website and in the show notes to donate through PayPal or any of the other handles that you can donate through. I've not put out that many episodes recently. I've got 2 put out in December and a handful in late summer, but I really haven't been able to put them out as regularly as I would like. But with funding from folks who really appreciate this work, it really helps me to be able to continue to do this. So if you feel called to support this work and keep it going and the conversations we have here, you can do that at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt. It's again linked in the show notes of every episode. And if you go to my website ofsedgeandsalt.com, and that's sedge like the plant, sedge, OFSEDGEANDSALT.com, and also the Patreon is the same set of words. You can find everything on there to support, and every platform to listen to the podcast is linked there in the page for the podcast. And any amount of support is super helpful and really appreciated. I'm hoping to start a GoFundMe soon for the podcast, because I've never done that, and it is just something that I've kind of shied away from, but I realize that right now it would be super helpful to create something like that for this project to really give it a big boost. And so look out for the links to that when I launch it. I've got to get on the computer and where I have cell phone service to kind of get it all figured out to get that launched. And if you feel called to donate to that when it comes out, that would be amazing. So happy listening, y'all. And yeah, sit down and really enjoy this very fun, interwoven tapestry of conversation with Ted Packard. It is early February in Ignacio, Colorado, outside of Durango, Four Corners region, where you live, Ted, these days.
Mm-hmm.
Never thought you would end up here, I guess.
No. Never thought that Kelly Moody would visit me on her birthday either. Again.
I know. I don't know the last time we've been hanging out for my birthday. It's been,
probably about 10 years.
So, will you start maybe by introducing yourself however you best feel like you can do that, and give a little bit of a place-making description of where we are in the world?
Yeah. Well, that feels like the place to start is in this watershed of the Los Pinos River, which comes out of the southern San Juans and winds through southern Ute tribal lands, out of the incredible diversity of the Southern Rockies and into the low, flat, and mesa-covered pinyon and juniper and sagebrush and myriad tiny root plants and ditch willows as the irrigation ditches crisscross this land, and herds of cows and sheep, and the great horned owls that mate outside our doorstep, and coyote and red fox and gray fox, and juniper titmouse, who right now is somewhere very close by with the coolest gray mohawk that anyone has ever sported. And yeah, this is the southwest of the United States, southwestern Colorado, and on this place, Turtle Island, where we can see in the distance the snowy peaks, called by us, the San Juans, called by us, the bombardiers that are up there. And this is where I live. We're sitting in my music and art and creative studio, so we're also surrounded by myriad beings like juniper titmouse and
the birds
a poor white-breasted nuthatch and a dark-eyed junco, Virginia box turtle shell, and a few stones from the creek that I grew up in, and guitars in various states of disarray and art project, and so that's where we are, by one way of saying it. And my name is Theodore Lewis Packard, and I was born far from here, and I'm a relative newcomer to this part of the world. This is my This is my 4th winter in this place. So it's always tempting to say what my jobs are, because in our society that seems to be one of the, when someone asks, what do you do? We answer with our job, and gee whiz, is that hardly, for many of us, hardly what we do. But for me, I think that one of the defining blessings of my life is that I've been able, for my adult life, to basically do jobs that actually are what I want to be doing in the world. And that's a great privilege of mine. And like I said, just an incredible blessing, and it's not without its own hardships and wanderings lost in the dark ether of who am I and what am I doing on this planet, and eventually it comes around to, yes, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. Right now, what that looks like is working with children outside in what you could call nature connection work. That's the field, the official field, as we now have an industry, a budding industry of what was once just an integrated functional community of humans that had children running all about and spending time with the people that they were drawn to and learning what they were drawn to with big healthy doses of required foraging or activities, or living in the web of mutuality in a culture. And something like that is what I and many, many, many people are trying to do now. And it looks like, from the outside, and hopefully to the kids, it's mostly invisible, it looks like playing. It looks like going out in the world in spaces that we might call wild, and to use that charged word, and creating positive experiences with the kids. That's the baseline. And when I'm working with really urban populations generally, or very, very tech-savvy families, that's the baseline, is just trying to get human children outside forming positive experiences with nature, because no matter what they do, whatever life path they choose, that's deep inside them. That seed will grow their whole life, and maybe they'll just be that person who one time in 40 years, if we still are allowed to vote, they might vote one time to do something that helps the earth and says yes to growth and generativity and reciprocity. Maybe one time they'll do that. That's the least that I hope for as an outcome. But it's also just about helping them regulate nervous systems and co-regulate with each other, co-regulate with the earth itself, the earth as being, and plants as being, and animals as being, and weather as beings, all these individual elements of existence that we tend to parse out, but are actually just messy life, all over messy life, all over messy life. And hopefully the children feel part and parcel of that, and feel that home, feel connection, feel belonging. And I've spent many years doing that work with very, I would say, initially disconnected populations. And right now, the work that I'm doing is very different, because I'm working with a lovely small homeschool group full of righteous families that they're all on the same page of wanting their of valuing time in nature and unstructured time for boredom to kick in, and the children to create things that no one else has created for them. They're not playing a game someone else made up for them. They're not reading a book that someone else wrote for them. They're not playing a game on a screen that someone else made for them. They're creating their own stories. And along the way, maybe when they're ready, when they want it, I'm there to say, oh, you're curious about this plant. Oh, well, let's investigate this plant. And yeah, let's try chewing on the bark. Ooh, what does it taste like? Oh, let's smell it. Let's feel it. Let's sit with them and listen to them and ask them questions. And oh, you're cold. Oh, you're cold right now. Okay. Well, what could we do to warm up? Oh, we could have a fire. Great. Do you know how to make a fire? Oh, you don't? Great. Let's learn how to make a fire. Let's learn in whatever way is going to help create just the right amount of challenge that they'll stay engaged and will come back to it if they get frustrated, and just enough success that they have a connective experience and want to stay there and keep building. And so I'm not trying to save the world all at once. I'm just trying to help be a human that helps other humans live a life of reciprocity and belonging, so that we all are healthier and that we're all part of an ever more...
It's such a big thing to try to do in the world, I think, in some ways, because we have so much pressure and resistance from mainstream culture for these things that you're planting, these little seeds, to not germinate and to not... It's like it's doing it. No wonder it's easy to question sometimes what's the point, when it feels like everything is wanting it to not be the case. It's like we're supposed to be sitting in front of our computers 10 hours a day working and making content and being productive and scheduling every moment of our time, and what use is there to... What use to capitalism is there to play around with the trees,
Well, and this winter, during the Holy Nights, I experimented with actually paying attention to them. I'm used to attending to the solstice and these big important celestial and terrestrial interactions, but I'd never used that period of time after the solstice through the Epiphany, and this year I did, because of this little group of people that we came together and had a solstice ritual. And it was in preparing for that ritual that I realized, oh, what I need to do is marry my body to the earth more. And what that looked like at that night was out in Mancos, Colorado, was getting in the Mancos River, like breaking through the ice and laying my body down in the river and
on the winter solstice.
Yeah, and dedicating, pledging myself to make my body with the earth. And for me, that was a personal feeling of, good God, I'm not healthy enough. And looking out at the earth and saying, good God, you don't deserve to be this unhealthy. And feeling that connection of, if I make my body, I'm making the earth's body. And as I make the earth's body, I'm making my body. There's not a separation there. So that I was looking for physical ways to express that. And in the days after that evening ritual, I would go out onto this patch of land, and at this point there was a lot of snow on the ground, and I would be looking for bare pieces of earth, because I wanted to just lay my body on the earth for long periods of time. And in order to do that, I had to follow deer trails, because the only bare patches were deer lays, where they laid there at just the right time and for long enough to either prevent snow from falling there or to melt out the snow to the ground. And mostly it was from them laying there while the snow was falling. And so I would go out and I would find those little deer lays and I would curl my body up and lay down. And capitalism doesn't give a shit about that. Capitalism probably fucking hates that. As an entity, the entity of capitalism is angry at me for that because I wasn't on Amazon buying some stuff I didn't need.
Or telling you you're being a tree hugger that needs to get your head out of the clouds or something.
Oh yeah, get my head out of the dirt.
Or the dirt.
But there were just these moments that, I was laying there in a deer lay at, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and snow started falling. And it was that. Of the million names of snow that there are, I don't know the name for this kind of snow. The kind that feels like tiny little diamond shards when they fall on the side of your cheek when you're laying on the ground. And just laying there in that moment, the feelings that I had, the connection that I felt in that moment cannot be purchased, cannot be traded for. They can be taught and facilitated, I suppose, by other people. You can find your way to them that way. And sure, you could buy a book. Yeah, you could. Actually, of course, it's in this world, you could buy it. Of course you could buy it. You could buy it in a book. You could buy it in a class. You
a book that tells you to go do it.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
an online course that tells you to go do it.
Exactly. Yeah, the Zoom seminar that it's going to say, okay, now everybody turn off the Zoom and go outside and connect. Which, again, is such a privilege for me to live here where there is space for me to do this with my body. I don't live in a city. I don't live a life where I have to be working every hour of waking life. I don't have to be away making money for that. So all that is to say that that's what I do, among many things. And I hope that my effect in the world is one where other humans are feeling more connected to, as we tend to say, to each other and to the earth and to ourselves, because that's where healthy culture grows from.
And you just started doing this again after a while of kind of taking a break, right? Because when y'all moved here to Colorado, needing to have a shift from what you and your partner, Annika, you were doing this like full on many days a week as a huge thing, running these big programs with lots of kids, and then coming to a whole different place and like basically taking a break and now restarting it in some form. Right now doing this work feels very different in my life than it ever has before. I'm running a small homeschool group on my own with just a few families that are, passionate and interested, but I'm the only person on the ground with the kids, and that's very different from living in Western Washington working with wonderful, well-established programs that are very large, that have substantial and extraordinarily skilled and experienced mentors that are peers and co-workers and community co-conspirators, where we're all weaving something huge together, and doing that many days a week, going on long teen expedition programs. And in Western Washington, that means that if you're doing that, you're wet all the time. And we lived in a little drafty cabin with a little inefficient wood stove, and it felt like for years and years of our lives we would come home and take off our wet clothes and start the fire and put our wet clothes by the fire and then put on damp clothes the next day to go out and do it all again. And it was
wonderful and fulfilling in so many ways. And like many things, we got to a point where we needed a break from it in a big way, and we needed a big shift away from the permanent rain that was the Pacific Northwest. I know that it's nowhere near what it used to be because of intense drought and insanity climatically up there, but yeah, we knew that we needed to head over the mountains at the very least, and went on an incredible intuitive journey that took us all the way down here to, at first, Durango, and then down here towards on the in-between lands, down onto these Ute tribal lands.
Mm-hmm. Drying out here.
Drying out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, our noses, geez, and our eyes, and all our mucous membranes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But your bones are dry.
Our bones are dry.
Not no wet bones. You know how it is when it's 40 degrees and raining. Just wet bones.
33 degrees. 33 degrees, putting up a tarp in the rain, and you reach up to tie that knot, and the water just runs down the undersides of your arms into your armpits and down into your long underwear. And then you look down and you see the same thing is happening to 4 other small children. And that's the start of your day.
Oh, God.
It's worth it, and it's hard sometimes.
Well, let's take a couple steps back, and then we'll wrap back into this place where we are in the conversation. But we met when I was 19 on the coast of Virginia in college. Christopher Newport University is the school that we both went to. And you grew up in Northern Virginia, and I grew up in Southern Virginia.
I take slight offense to that. I grew up on the western side of Northern Virginia, tucked into the Appalachian Mountains. So my experience of Northern Virginia was very much, there is Northern Virginia over there, and it's eating my rural existence alive.
Yeah.
So I'm still mad that
Directionally
it is just plain true that I grew up in Northern Virginia, because that conjures a very different image, I think, than what my experience was.
You grew up in a hand-built log cabin that your parents built on a dirt road in Northern Virginia, on the same road that the president of the World Bank lived on down the street. It was like very much the collision of Appalachia and the World Bank, you know?
Yeah, and the chief lobbyist for Monsanto bought the farm across the street from us, which...
The strawberry farm?
The strawberry farm.
God.
Yeah, and that was... The pond on that property was the first place that I ever caught a fish. That was the first place that I ever caught a frog. And when they moved in, within 1 year, there were no sounds of frogs singing in that pond anymore.
Oh, wait, so when...
They killed the pond.
When we were...
With Monsanto chemicals.
There all the time, they were living there. It wasn't after that. Oh, wow, I didn't know. I knew that y'all were mad about the chemical use, but I didn't know that was who that was.
Chief lobbyist for Monsanto to Congress.
Oh, God. Were you acquaintances with them?
No.
You didn't even talk to them?
I toyed with the idea of writing them an angry letter for a few years, just only to tell them the impact that they had and what it looked like in my life and what it looked like in the life in that pond and on that land. And at that point, I didn't know how to do it in a way that felt clean to me. It was pure rage, and I was talking about this with my folks, and they were wary because, at this point I was in my 20s and didn't live in the house all the time. I would come visit, but they were a little exactly. They were a little wary because, well, that's still our neighbor, and we are the ones who have to stay here. So I never found the right words, and today I would just go talk to them and make connection and actually be curious about them, and eventually that story would come out, and I think it would have a much bigger impact than receiving one angry letter from basically a teenager would have had.
That's something we were talking about the other day, is like the shift you felt in your life. You know, when we were in college, we were very, passionately...
I was a pissed off Daniel Quinn soldier of civilization is total BS, it's killing everything, all the cultures that knew how to live without destroying the world have been destroyed except for a few, and they're all, who knows what's going on with them, because I haven't had any experience with them, and I'm just so mad that this is the lot that we've been cast in life, and thank God for these anthropology and philosophy and religion professors and history professors at this college, and thank God for our little social group of total nerds and weirdos and
thank God for our little group of weirdos.
Neo-hippie pagan whatevers that we were, kind of, because that, and looking back on it, I look at it and I'm like, oh, we had intellectual outlets in ourselves, in each other, and in our classes, and we had incredible somatic outlets in...
With the movement, we did a lot.
In the movement,
But we were both talking about how we don't have enough in our lives now. Like, I think some people I know in my life have never even seen me in the place of having that regularly. And like...
if you haven't seen Kelly Moody, totally in her element, dancing around a fire in a circle of dancers, and that circle of dancers is surrounded by a circle of drummers, and that circle of drummers is surrounded by people that are watching, witnessing, and caring about what's going on, and it's not a party. It's an intentional community event that is focused on healing and actually somatic trance, and the incredible transformations that occurred because of not doing that once, but doing that every week. And I think
we've done hundreds of these together, maybe.
Yeah, hundreds of them. And whether it was at the weekly drum circle at Mystic Moon in Norfolk, which shout out to that amazing group of humans that has dedicated themselves towards... I'm
sure some of them are going to be listening to this, because anything that gets shouted out on Facebook with Ted, people are going to be like, what's Ted up to? There's a lot of things that we're speaking to right now that we're just getting excited about too. This is us being nostalgic and going down memory lane of our
some of that.
College days.
There's some of that, but there's also...
Us really realizing, thinking about lately, we spent a month together basically, which is the longest we've probably spent together since we dated years ago. And
it's been 10 years since we've spent this much time together.
I mean, when I was here with Gabe, we had some dates and hung out, and you and Annika joined us on the trail a little bit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always kind of like, where do we even begin?
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen each other that much lately, you know.
But yeah, we've been reflecting on those specific things during that time period that were actually really transformative. And I've been, in the last year, I've been diving really deep with an incredible podcast called The Emerald with this guy, Josh Schrei, who... It's basically, I think of it as a college class on the synthesis of myth and somatic experience and trance and world religions. And he does a beautiful job of making each episode kind of its own somatic experience a lot of the time. And it's brilliant. It activates my super geeky brain. I just imagine you in college with all the philosophy and religious studies classes that you would... this could have been one of our classes and we would have freaked out over it. But one of the things that I'm coming to really respect and dive deeper into in my life is the trance brain state as kind of the thing that we as humans have been aiming at with cultural activity since the beginning. And it used to look like dancing around a fire, drumming, singing, but it also looks like, you know, rhythmic planting, rhythmic processing of materials and singing songs. Like all those things are trance state. Crafting can get you in a trance state. And today in a bit more dominator culture, civilized style.
Daniel Quinn language there. Dominator culture.
Mother culture is whispering. It looks like sporting events. It looks like, I mean, the biggest thing it looks like is the phone. Like, absolutely, it's a trans-brain state because we're wired for it, and we will find it. And unfortunately, the capitalism culture totally knows that. Whether they're conscious of it or not, that's what they're aiming at, is entrancing us. So all this is to say that looking back on a once-a-week drum circle that was not a party, that was an intentional healing event.
Except for Beltane and the
well,
Wisteria.
but that's different. That's a seasonal celebration, which was also, in its own way, kind of, for me at the time, that was profound, to be tied to the seasons and to come together. And that wasn't the focused intentional healing ceremony where no one's drinking, where
it's Beltane.
You're
so
being
it's
quiet.
like,
It's
oh,
Beltane,
we're doing Beltane things.
Or it's autumn fires, or it's May Moon, and those were more, they were more debaucherous. Absolutely. There's no way around that, and that's also okay. There were also grief rituals there, which I didn't recognize as them at the time. But like the mead circles when John died, I remember the photographer, John.
Oh, yeah.
When he just, it was a tragic, unexpected, unlooked for, sudden death in that community. And there was a mead circle, and that was my first exposure to grief done a little bit more consciously. I'd been to a wake before, and I'd been to funerals before. And when I was I'm going to digress probably often in this conversation.
Okay.
But I learned to dance, actually, at what is really a grief ritual, which was an Irish wake, back when I was in middle school. And the reason I learned to dance is because they just played a ton of oldies. And the sister of the man who died was an old family friend, and she hadn't seen me since I was a little kid, and she was just enamored with me. She just thought I was this cute little 7th grader, 8th grader, whatever I was. And she taught me to dance all night long, and we danced, and she cried, and she kept telling me I was going to be an actor because I kept making her laugh, I guess. But looking back on it, that was a grief ritual of a sort. And then looking up to college, like, there were these little cultural pieces that were there. And as I look back on them, I realized that they were more intact and valuable than I, as an awkward early 20-something, trying to interact with a culture and community that wasn't yet my own. I always felt a little aloof and awkward that was entirely my own stuff in that community. And
we were always a little bit like, we were in it, but observing it at the same time. Like, are we pagan? I don't know. And there's a lot of interesting kind of syncretic, slightly culturally appropriative, sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting things going on, neo-paganism, like we were studying religion and philosophy and anthropology, and then yet going to this, even though we maybe would have had criticisms of it sometimes, or also were like, do we even fit in here? I don't know. They would always just call us that group, that would come in, and they always really wanted us there because we just came in with our colorful clothes and full of the sea of people in black clothes.
Yeah, the urbanish pagan community, and we were the tie-dye color and all that.
Yeah, although I don't know, my uniform was all over the place. But I
wanted to say that about the, what I thought of at the time as, culturally appropriative, or, during an actual ceremony, not ceremony, well, maybe ceremony.
Rituals, pagan rituals.
Yeah, there's a distinction between ritual and ceremony that I think this is actually really interesting. I've heard ritual and ceremony described as ceremony is where you know where you land at the end of it. So like lighting Hanukkah candles is a ceremony in that you're going to light the candles, you're going to say the prayer, you're going to put the candles there, and you're going to put it in the window, and then you're done. You know what your end point is. Whereas a ritual, you don't know what's going to happen. You set up the space, and most of the ritual is actually preparation for it a lot of the time. And you make yourself right in whatever way that makes sense to you, and you call in your support, whatever that looks like to you, and you step into the ritual space, and then you might have a few ideas of what's going to happen, but where it goes, you're not necessarily in control of. And so when I look at what we were doing there, I don't know, I wasn't in control of those pagan ceremonies or rituals that they were doing, but I think that they were ceremonies. I think that they had kind of a defined rote sort of style to some degree. And again, I don't know, because I felt like an outsider looking in, but the reason I'm talking about it is because I'm remembering they would be invoking goddesses, like actual goddess names, and I would be thinking, what the hell, like, you, Inanna? Like, who, first off, who is that? Second off, did you just, like, read a list of goddesses, and you're just going down, and you're just like, I'm calling in the goddess energy. Who? All of them. Let's get them all here. Come to the party, and see us mostly white people on a continent that you are not from.
Norfolk was a little more diverse than, I mean, there was not just white people there, but, you know.
I said mostly white.
Yeah.
It was mostly white. It wasn't entirely, but this is like I'm translating judgy 20-something me right now, the way that I saw those rituals going on. And I was just confused. I was like, I don't understand. Do you have actual relationships with these beings? Who are they? And you're doing these things. You're wearing white. You're like, you got a little dagger, and you get
doll, and
yeah, like all these things that I remember reading about in a book on Wicca by Cunningham. You know, in 8th grade or 9th grade. I just swallowed a gnat.
I saw it. I saw it.
It's because we have plants in the window. They like it in here. But I remember being so judgy of that in myself, and with a healthy dose of, I don't know what's actually going on, so you be quiet, little monkey judgy brain. Because
something
these
felt
are
right about
these
it,
are
so.
Friends, and I like these people, so, you know, I'm not trying to be a jerk to them, and I'm not trying to be a jerk in my head to them either, but it was still there. And now, just, I look back on it, and I'm like, wow, what amazing work they were doing, rediscovering their ancestral heritage with these gods and goddesses that are in their lineage in some way, and that are land beings, that are seasonal, like, that are entirely metaphors, not just metaphor, like the story, these mythic stories that these gods and goddesses come from, these stories are not allegory and myth so much of the time. They're physical expressions of the human body. So many of these stories are maps to the trance state. So many of these stories are maps to profound relationship with the earth, and they're survival stories, actually, for human culture. And I didn't realize that at the time. And
even though we were so geeky and like going to the William & Mary Library and spending hours researching mushroom cults and stuff.
Oh yeah.
We were like, what we were missing the point.
It was right there, and
yeah, we did every week.
I was distracted by the urban goth clothes, you know. That's which of course I was, because basically, like, developmentally, I was a teenager still, and what matters the most to teenagers is social. So even though we were super, super geeky and interested in exactly what they were doing, yeah, kind of missed the forest for the trees.
But I mean, on Newport News, in the school we went to was very urban too. I mean, it was hard for me, like, moving from South Hill, even though it also blew my mind everything that I got to see and learn and discover coming out of the small tobacco farming town into the city. But
You were such a fresh, new, clean, young one
Oh,
out in the
God.
world.
And but the Newport News, of all cities to move to, God, is like the worst city that exists, I think, in some ways. But thankfully, I mean, there's no.
I think that's their official corporate motto for the city.
Bad.
The worst city that exists.
We won't go
It's
into all
not.
the reasons why, but thankfully our school had a big patch of woods next to it that we would literally go out into and like pretend like we were elves and things like that, and it saved us. And I
It
think
saved us. And the trees on campus also.
that they started cutting down as we were on our way out, unfortunately. But
Many of them. But I was there last year.
you were
Yeah.
last year,
Last
right?
spring.
Because you did a road trip and we were in North Carolina and
Yeah.
that didn't work out.
So I actually got to revisit this campus after,
Any trees left?
yes, and including the tree, the live oak tree.
I thought they cut that down.
No, they didn't. And it's not the healthiest anymore, but that tree is still there. And that tree, yeah, what saved me in college was our friends and that tree in particular, where we could climb up and
all
hang out in this sprawling, not that high live oak, and almost nobody ever knew we were in there because people just walked underneath it. The path, the sidewalk at an intersection, a major intersection of paths on that campus was right next to and under that tree. 95% at least of those people never knew we were in that tree. And
Except for the people that knew to look.
yeah, and when they knew to look, then it was fun because then they were part of it too in some way. But yeah, that huge patch of forest around the reservoir nearby, if not for that,
A couple miles of trails.
5 miles. It's a 5 mile trail with innumerable little peninsulas, all reaching into the water there. And when I revisited that place, I knew, I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone, you can't go home again. Like, you can't recreate things that were in, and I wasn't trying to, but I was trying to kind of manage my expectations and experience by only going to look for a few things, because it would have been pretty overwhelming. Like the amazing experiences that were had there and connective experiences in certain places that are just bulldozed in our new buildings. But so I went back to the Mariners Museum Park and the Maury Trail, and in the forest I knew where an eagle's nest was.
You remember from afar.
Out near the Lions Bridge. And I remember from, specifically, really, it was when our friend Eve was still going to college there after I had graduated, and I went back and visited her. And that's one of the things we did, is we walked on the trail, and she said, "Oh, there's an eagle's nest here, I want to show you." And she showed me this eagle's nest. So I went back, that eagle's nest is still there.
Whoa.
And not only that, while I was there with Annika, it started to rain, and we realized as we walked in, looking up at these treetops, there were nests everywhere. And it's not just one eagle's nest. It was a heron rookery the whole time, and we didn't know it because we weren't total nature geeks at that point. But looking up, there were tons of nests. And we get to the little peninsula where the eagle's nest is, and sure enough, it's still there. And there's a great blue heron right there. And this eagle is hanging out next to the tree that its nest is in, like 15, 20 feet away. So we're looking up through this Virginia forest in the light drizzle, eating some food, just wrapped, just like two little kids like looking up like, "Oh, what's going to happen? Oh my gosh." And the eagle is staring at the heron, and the heron is ignoring the eagle. And a second eagle slowly swoops across the water, and we see as it arcs up, curves around, and whacks into the great blue heron. And the great blue heron flutters, falling slowly to the ground, going, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." And Annika Monica and my eyes just go wide and our mouths drop open and we look at each other and we look back up and we were looking through the forest and thinking, that heron just fell maybe 70 feet away just over a little rise. It's just on the other side of this little rise through the woods. And I turned to her and I say, did we just see a heron get killed? And we're just sitting there debating, like, should we go over? Like, what should we do? Should we go see if the heron's okay? Should we wait and see if the eagle is going to go down and eat this heron and finish the job? And who are we to interrupt that process from happening? And a few minutes later, a heron swooped up and landed right next to that tree again, this time facing the eagle, and we think it was the same heron. We think that it just got
He's like, no,
stunned.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm coming back.
Like, I'm okay. I'm big cranky. Just heron, so I'm okay.
Wow.
But it felt amazing to go back to that space and see that those are literal descendants of the birds that were there when we were spending time on that land, and to be able to go back to that place and see their children doing exactly what they were doing then, and we were pretty unaware of it. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that has come from you visiting, is we've kind of gotten to talk and I guess remember a little bit some of those loops that we've made in our lives, and just how our own awareness shifts and our own experience shifts, but when we come back to the same places, those places still exist and are still beings unto themselves, and are full of relationships that are also changing and evolving, and we're still part of it. And that's what I felt when I visited there. It was like, part of me still lives here. Part of me is still in this land.
I haven't been back in a long time. I don't know if I will. I don't know, just like intentionally go to Newport News anytime soon, but...
I don't really recommend it, honestly. unless you need to drive through, it's not.
I mean, we didn't even realize what we were missing some of the time. I know for me, being from where I grew up, I didn't grow up anywhere where there was really nature trails or places to hike. You know, having spent time in different places now across the West, where some people's experiences, like growing up here, if you grew up here, for example, there's nothing but trails. There's nothing but places to get lost endlessly. And then going there, we had that one little, basically fenced-in preserve.
Sanctuary. Nature
in a little box in the midst of sprawly madness, you know.
Yeah.
And then even just living by a trail, a place where you could hike on a trail, I had never experienced really walking on nature trails. You know, like, and now I'm like, how could you even, and having to talk to people who grew up where that was a norm. I'm like, just remember that, like, a lot of people don't experience this.
Yeah.
Even the concept of a nature trail, you know.
And that's one of the places where I feel so much more empathy and caring and compassion for other people than I used to, because I realize so much that everybody's experience is so different. The baseline that everyone's working from is so different. And what is profound for someone is old news for another person. And what is, you know, I remember your dad seeing the movie Avatar, the James Cameron movie Avatar, and I don't remember if it was him saying this or you telling me about it, but him saying, that was just the most profound movie I've ever seen in my life, and my life has changed forever because of it. And I just...
We were like, we've been, like, this is what we've been saying.
Oh my God, really? That movie changed your life? Because that's the first time you've encountered the concept of all life is connected and cares about each other and matters to each other and is interwoven, and that you as a cognizant bipedal human can engage with that also. Like, wait, that was news to you?
Well, he knew, but he forgot.
Something-year-old. Oh, sure.
His years of peyote,
sure.
You know, eating and things like that. Were back in the day, but he had, you know.
Well, and yeah. Anyways. But yeah, this is all just pointing at, like, when I interact with people now, I have no expectation about where they're at. Or I try to. When I'm in my best self, I don't have any expectation about where they're at, and I'm just looking for what is the connective point. And this is something that Carolyn Casey talks about, is what do you both care about? There's something you both care about. Like she's this incredible wild witchy woman who, has lived with wolf dogs and she's one of these people that works in her own terms behind the scenes energetically in the world. And she has found herself at like high level corporate conservative councils and conventions and things. And when she talks to someone there, she's trying to find out, where do we have commonality? What is it? And she's talking to some like offshore oil executive who makes their living literally destroying the ocean, because all oil rigs leak eventually. And what does she end up asking this person? She says, she finds out that they have a yacht. And so she says, oh, what do you love about the ocean? That's her question. What do you love about the ocean? And what does he have to say? He has so much to say, because he loves the ocean. He wants to be out there. That's the reason he got into offshore oil drilling, is because it was on the water to begin with. And he can talk about the sun, and he can talk about the light on the water, and he can talk about fishing, and he can talk about swimming in the ocean, and he can talk about incredible journeys that he's gone on that matter so much to him. And then all of a sudden they're friends, because they both love the ocean. And that's something that matters to me now so much more.
Than when we were 20, when we were like,
oh, yeah.
you, because you...
Yeah. Oh, I'm so pissed at you because you believe this, or you voted for this person, or you support this policy that is killing people. Okay. Yes, that is all true. And in the moment, I'm not changing a mind by being angry at them to their face. I'm not changing that mind. I'm changing a mind by forming relationship and working the long work of being in mutuality with each other. And like, that's something that I've learned in such a different way living out here in rural Colorado, is that you live around totally different people than you. No matter who you are, you're surrounded by very, very divergent views. And I've never lived with a more neighborly attitude than I have now, because I've seen people show up for each other on the ground where we are. Like, oh, it snowed. Oh, my neighbor just came and plowed me out without being asked and didn't even come to the door and say anything. Wow, amazing. Oh, my neighbor calls me up and says, crap, I'm stuck in town and the horses need feeding at my place and a horse blanket needs to be put on. Oh, of course, yeah, we'll go right over. Or any number of things. A fence needs fixing. A, tree needs pruning. Whatever it is. And we happen right here to be surrounded by neighbors that are getting older, that are more elderly, and so are needing more and more help. And being the young, strapping mid-30s man that I am, that means that's what I get called for, is like the ground's frozen and our septic tank is blocked and we need to find it, and we buried it 40 years ago and we don't actually 50 years ago, and we don't know exactly where it is, so we need you to dig a hole. It might be in the wrong place. It needs to be 4 feet deep. And this was my December, and I wouldn't have it any other way, because all of a sudden we are depending on each other and we care about each other. And what matters more than the nuances of how we speak about the most delicate of issues, or the nuances of how we vote on any particular thing, those are less important than we are surviving together and building relationship. And once those relationships are there, those conversations, when they happen, are so generative.
Yeah.
And they're so much more honest, and there's so much more, there's there's actually room to shift
Well,
because we have those deeper connections.
Where you grew up in some ways isn't necessarily that different in a lot of ways from here, in that sense of that place where the crazy Northern Virginia sprawl was meeting rural Appalachia, both in the conservative, more DC urbanite interface and the old-timey Appalachian interface and your parents being old hippies interface, except...
Take that, parents. You've been labeled old hippies.
Well, now they're old hippies. I don't know if they would have called themselves old. Well, I don't know. Maybe your dad would have called himself an old hippie.
No, I think that my parents get called hippies. I don't know that they have ever self-identified as such.
As old hippies?
Yeah.
Well, to me, compared to my parents, I thought of them as old hippies, but...
This is exactly what I mean.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, it's all relative.
People who... the music they listen to and building their own cabin in the woods. And,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But, like, in that... Except that you didn't have the tools or, like, awareness then growing up there necessarily to think that way, the way you're thinking now about the way you're living here. I mean, of course... Mm-hmm. Both of you and Annika have expressed, too, feeling some of that lack of wanting more people your age who think like you around, more community in the sense of even the kind of thing you experienced when you lived where the Wilderness Awareness School is, and that's not necessarily here in the same way, but you have this other organic thing that's forming and flowing that requires staying somewhere. We've been talking about this a lot. Like, what does it mean to have community in place? And sometimes it's just like...
It's mundane.
Yeah, you might...
That's what I'm starting to learn and appreciate so much. And I think it'll make me better at connecting in with, my target community of, like, actual peers. But
what is that really now? Especially now where everyone...
Words.
There's no, like...
No, it's a fantasy in my head as someone who grew up with that. You would probably call me out for my Gemini-ness in this. You tend to see that in me when I'm ignorant of it. But, as an introvert who also desperately longs for connection and community and can be really outgoing and really, I'll hold center in a community ritual, of 60 people. Like, I'll be the MC, I'll do it, that's fine. And
crawl in the corner and be like, don't fucking talk to me ever.
No, I won't. It won't be, it won't be don't talk to me.
For the next 5 days.
No, it's secretly like, I want connection. And it's my own dichotomy there. So when I say that I haven't connected in with, a community of peers around here, it's entirely not true in some ways. There's lots of wonderful people around here that are interested in very similar things to what I am. And also, it doesn't look like what is in my bones, what is in all of our bones, like in our DNA, in our epigenetics. If you go far enough, we all come from, if you want to put quotes around the word intact culture, we all come from a culture where you are known, you are important, and you are seen by the community. You've gone through your rites of passage when it's time, when the elders have seen you exhibit the traits that indicate you're ready for the next step of stepping into the web of mutuality that is human existence. And even with training, even going to amazing communities like Wilderness Awareness School, for instance, Vashon Wilderness program that I worked at, even, being in a traveling band whose whole MO of Momentary Prophets was connection, actually. It was like rabble-rousing and trying to get community to look around and recognize itself and say, oh, we can do the things that we dream of if we just do it together. That was the whole point of all that music, of all that touring. And even doing all those things, well, gee whiz, I'm still subject to and victim of and co-collaborator with the dominator culture and am creating an isolated, lonely existence. I don't escape it either.
Look at me. I'm like
none of us escape
on the
it.
road by myself yet again.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I don't want that.
I know.
I want people to collaborate with, you know, and it's such a thing where it's like, well, do your own thing. I'm like, well, I've been doing my own thing. It's like an individualistic culture tells us that we need to make our own in the world, and I've been so resistant to that, and so much of my work has been about weaving people and plants and things. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, but that's still me as an individual doing that. Like,
yeah,
I'm always longing to release that, like, that I'm an isolated unit individually working into the world, and yet here I am still, you know, I mean, we both talked a lot about what does community look like, or you know, in college we didn't actually talk all the time about that because we kind of had our little temporary community that felt like enough. But we talked about what does an ideal world look like? What does an ideal relationship with place and the land look like?
With my master's in education, the final paper that I had to write for that, I wanted to create an integrated school in a community, and this tells you the limitations of that program. My sponsors had no idea what that meant or what that looked like. The best thing they could come up with was, well, there's this thing called charter schools. I guess you should write a paper about charter schools. And I was like, oh God, okay, fine. And I designed on paper an intentional community, which I'd never heard of before. And the school was one wing of this 9-winged, massive, you know, beautiful structure where there's food and there's music and there's library and there's classes.
$1 million, bajillion dollars to be able to buy land and do this.
But, you know, it's made of Connex or pallets or something, you know. But, like, I had to create that out of whole cloth for myself because it wasn't being reflected in the world around me that I knew about, that I had access to. So, like, that's where I was thinking about community back then, was it should be possible. It should be integrated, and came up with this pipe dream that, yeah, and to create out of whole cloth. It's weird to think about that.
Why isn't it so easy? We have so much freaking land and, like, so many people who want to do it. Why?
In my experience, it's relationship issues.
Why haven't we done it? You know, like we talked about it, but it's just the relationship stuff, power dynamics. Our culture is still encouraging us to act as individuals. All of us still needing to make money to live in the world. And where do we come up? I mean, to just have capital to even do it. Plus, a lot of places you can only have one house on a property or something like that. It's just logistical parameters that the powers that be put onto how you can exist with each other. It encourages and or forces us to be separate from each other as these, like, nuclear family units on land, you know.
Do you have that on a handout? Because that's a great bullet list of when someone, when the next 16-year-old, 17-year-old comes up to you and says, let's make an intentional community, you can just pull out that handout and say, well, have you solved those things yet? Because that's what
people we need those kids that you're educating who end up being in, like, a position in the government to then change the law so that it's easier for your grandmother to live in and build a grandmother's unit in the backyard for her to live in, so she doesn't have to go to a nursing home, you know.
Yeah, dear God, how horrific is that?
Or to be able to have 3 houses on a piece of land, or to be able to have it all be totally off grid without being tied into the grid. Some places you can literally not do that. It's really frustrating, and maybe places you can, it's too expensive, or, you know, or you don't want to live there for other reasons, and it's like, that's a whole other thing. But it's hard to be in your mid-30s and, like, having had that idealism, and we talked about it as this poignant idealism that we never wanted to let go of, you know, and at least some aspect of it, and knowing that potentially the future meant that we might not be able to live the way that we had hoped, you know. And in some ways I feel like we both have lived these really freaking cool lives so far, beyond our wildest dreams in a lot of ways, and it looks very different than we ever imagined.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and this is why I teach. Like, I'm hoping to grow humans that in that laundry list of why it's hard, why there aren't just beautiful, intact communities around us all over the place. Yeah, I'm hoping to grow people that don't have those relationship hang-ups, can communicate beautifully, understand themselves enough to be in right relationship with each other, and are fucking warriors that are going to change or artfully and safely ignore the rules of culture and laws when they impede what is our birthright as human beings, which is to live in community and live in mutuality with you.
I feel such grief for not having that in my life at this point. Like, living in a place where I have my kin right around me. I mean, we both have experienced that in different ways in our lives at moments. Like when I lived in North Carolina back in the day and ran a farm, and there was like people in little tiny houses everywhere, and I could walk to anyone's home. It was like that it was a moment that I haven't found anything else like it since. And even going back there this summer, it's different, at least the way I feel like I relate in the world. But also, I'm like, well, yeah, what does it mean to feel like it feels right? Because there was a moment where, like, this feels so good. Like, how could I ever go live back to living in, like, a space where, apartment where, like, I don't have anybody nearby that I know, and I'm, like, there by myself all the time, or, like, how could I ever do that, after experiencing this? And, yeah, like, I mean, and you have lived in different scenarios, too, where in a community house or near people, and you're getting together every day and doing this work together, or our experience in college of our really interesting weirdo music, art, philosophy, dumpster diving crew that would try to get together as much as possible. We didn't even know that we were trying to make community. We were just like, this is so fun. Let's just keep gathering and talking and playing weird instruments together.
Oh my gosh, that's a beautiful expression of boredom as generative space, as generative cognitive space, because we were just there together, and what did we do? We created something that we had never seen before. And what was it? Well, it was naturally beautiful, because what else were we going to do? Well, we managed to avoid some of the pitfalls, and we managed to come into contact with enough righteous ideas to get us nudged out the door. But we were also self-initiating young people that were
cared.
looking for meaning in ourselves. And I know that many of us had already gone through a pretty experimental plant use phase, which is a little bit more of the harsher in self-initiations, whether it's through drinking or whatever. I know that I did that my freshman year, my first year.
Psychedelics.
But then the shift with psychedelics from this is some self-initiation stuff to there's something sacred here.
Really intentional. Most of the time we did it was very intentional.
Yeah.
And I mean, we didn't even realize what we were doing at the time. And it's not like we...
To some degree. We'd been reading some Terence McKenna. I feel like that was where the mutual research was actually pretty deep for our age. Like, if you spread it out amongst us, we had all gone kind of deep in our own ways in researching entheogenic use.
Yeah. I really miss the intellectual stimulation of what I had then. I just love being intellectually stimulated by my peers. Or somatically stimulated. I mean, we were all in these classes every week. In some ways, we felt like some aspects of this is pointless. The structure of this is pointless. But in other ways, we were like infinitely like, oh my God, we meet up at the Live Oak and you're like, so this thing that I just talked about in this class, like, it's just things I got to talk. Mike saying too, like these people that were these characters in our lives. We're like, oh my God, so we got to talk about this. I needed to. What do you think of this? And I just really, whatever you want to call that. What is the club that we created for ourselves, like, of being able to reflect with each other about these ideas that we were having. And yet we were in this weird environment. It's not like we were all going to school in some place in the middle of the mountains, you know.
Yeah.
We were in this really strange environment, and then the whole mystic moon pagan community was outside of that, but we would like interact with it every week, and in a way it was like the one break from the brainy thinking a lot stuff.
Or running away into the woods and going and spending time out there. I feel like we had these somatic integration points that actually, looking back on it, we were doing it really intelligently and intuitively.
Yeah,
because
music,
we would have these classes of sedentary intellectual stimulation, and then we'd go outside, hang out under trees, maybe throw frisbees and run with our bodies, maybe climb up into trees and regulate ourselves with each other and with the physical plants and the earth there. And
go dance like crazy once a week.
Yeah, go dance or make our own dance parties.
We would do all these crazy art projects together.
Yeah,
and
we were moving that energy in intuitive and incredibly intelligent ways, actually.
Collectively, it wasn't just, I mean, sure, I made art by myself or something like that, or we would go in the woods by ourselves sometimes, but we did a lot of this collectively, and that witnessing or that feeling of togetherness, because we had our own little pagan club at the school too that we got funding for.
We had anthropology club too.
We got money to have like an Earth Day festival with a drum circle. The school gave us money to do these things because they were a public school that wasn't supposedly not religiously affiliated, but was very Christian.
Except they built a chapel.
But they had to give us money because we were like the only thing that wasn't Christian on the I think, I don't know, maybe it's different. It's obviously different now, but you know, they had to give
It's definitely whether it's true objectively, it felt that way to us. I definitely felt so much establishment, Judeo-Christian, conservative antagonism from the organization of the school. And some of that was self-created, I'm sure, and a lot of it I think was legitimate.
They still let us exist and do our thing.
They did. They did not exterminate us.
They did not.
They did not. They did, yell at Gordon for walking barefoot through a building over and over and over again. Things like that.
God.
But also, looking at having now been a mentor of teens who become 20-somethings, good Lord, I can't imagine what it would have been like to deal with us as these young people that are basically children. We're uninitiated children, and we're looking for extreme
experiences. And we created an us and them to a degree. By the end of our time there, we had a lot more different kinds of people folded into our little world.
And we also understood how to work with the school a little bit more elegantly. There's still some antagonism there, and that's age appropriate, especially in this cultural paradigm.
Well, of course, I think about our friends who were over in the mountains doing like literal activism, trying to save mountains from being blown up and stuff. We didn't have those opportunities right in front of us being on the coast. Like, there was nuclear bombs being built down the road, but hell if we were going to do any activism related to that, because that's like a thing that would get you put in prison for a really long time, So, there wasn't opportunities for us to be enacting in this young self-righteous
that we knew
way
about.
that we even knew about.
I'm sure there were.
We could have,
The closest thing that happened to like that for me was at that park at the Mariners Museum, when there was one day that I was out there alone on the edge of the James River, and there's this off-limits area there, this riparian slope that goes down to the river from the trail.
The horrible statue that says something about conquering something.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, big conquering statue is in sight, but there's this beautiful kind of, it's a stabilizing slope, so it's full of just wild plants everywhere, and there's signs everywhere that say rehabilitation area, keep off. And this one day I show up there, and there's someone bush hogging it. And I saw it happening for like 30 seconds, and my nervous system freaked out. I was just looking around wide-eyed, like, what is happening? Why is this happening? It's been years of coming to this place, and this has always been a quote-unquote wild, untamed area that is supposed to be even off limits to people so that wildlife can be there, and someone's bush hogging it. And I, after like less than a minute of galvanizing myself and looking around and realizing no one else is here to do anything, I guess it's me. And I went up and I just flagged the guy down and I said, "Excuse me, why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing." And I said, "Okay, who's your boss and why did they tell you to do it? Because do you see that sign there that says off limits riparian? Like, do you see what this is going?" And I told him that this has been like this for years and this doesn't happen. And he said, "Okay, I guess I'll call my boss." And he called his boss. His boss said, "Stop what you're doing. You're not supposed to be doing that."
Oh,
I don't know how he got onto it, but
wow.
But yeah, and it was being in the right place at the right time and knowing the place.
Mm-hmm.
If I had been a random naturalist, tourist or something that, had come by and was birding and was like trying to check off birds off my life list, but I was not from that place, hadn't made myself with that place, I wouldn't have known or cared enough to go interrupt a person on a big machine and ask and tell them to stop. And yeah, and when I think about that, I'm like, if I hadn't been friends with the likes of Marley Green and all of the people in Mountain Justice that were out at JMU at that point that were doing direct action and really maybe even monkey wrenching. I don't know everything they were up to, and I'm just so grateful that they were in my awareness enough, because I think that that's the kind of thing that empowered me to just put my body there and say no. And yeah, it's a tiny thing. It's this one little riparian area, this one little spit of land that's totally manufactured. Looking back on it now, it's a dam. That was a dam that was built, 50 years ago or something like that.
Along a really polluted river.
Along a really
doesn't have
polluted
oysters
river.
or wild rice anymore.
Yep,
but
exactly. So,
the James River.
I'm patting myself on the back here for a tiny, tiny little thing. And that was a place that was dear, dear to me, that I felt like I was a protector of. And in that moment, I had the opportunity to be a protector, and I just kind of instinctively did it. And that's what I really hope is happening all over the place with people connecting more with land, is that people are intuitively becoming protectors.
It feels like too much sometimes, and I think this is what makes so many people feel depressed. And they feel socially isolated without community, in the culture, again, of individualism and capitalism, for one thing. And then they care. They have awareness. There's lots of people that actually really know what the hell is going on, and they actually care, but that makes that
crippling,
polarity is crippling. I mean, I'm feeling that in myself a lot lately, of like, how do I feel like I'm on my own a lot, and I'm like, how do I do this on my own? Like, I don't want to, but yet it keeps happening. It's like, and there's so many people who feel like that, and they feel like giving up, or they feel like the care that they have, it's almost like ignorance is bliss, right? But that's the problem, and that's the seeds you're planting in the kids, or like we're planting on the podcast, or with each other in our conversations, is like, no, keep caring, even if it's just about this one plant in this one place, or it's about this one rock being this certain way, or like, this one cave should be protected, or whatever it is.
Fox says worry, heart held out. What path can bring me to him? What hope, what light will lead us from there? And the moon, wide and full, replied, I will ride in your eyes. Dream. So down she crawled,
And through she crawled
and in she crawled
to her lover's
bed. She lay, she slept,
In dreams she left
to find her love.
with the light in her eyes.
In dreams, love, I've come to find you.
Through flower and desert, she followed his trail. Out of ball, she traced descent. Through canyons did she seek him, and walls of blackest fear they crowded her trail. And the moon,
Shining through her eyes, she found her love huddled in fear. She stood before him and cried, open your eyes. Open your eyes. In dreams, love, I've come to find you, come to find you,
We were talking about the grief of being sensitive and being aware that it feels harder sometimes as you get older to know how to hold it if you are someone that has had seeds planted, both whatever way that is, like just awareness of the disconnect that our culture faces or the destruction that's happening, and it feels like too much sometimes. And
I mean, the literal devastation of having physically planted seeds, and then you go back and those trees are not there anymore that you planted, like that kind of thing. That's the metaphor in the body too.
I had my dad do that to my herb garden last year. That I put 10, 12, 15 years worth of plants in.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Annika spent years in West Seattle creating from scratch a permaculture garden and fruit orchard.
Wow.
And if you look at satellite pictures now, it does not exist. It's a new fire station. It's gone. Literally doesn't exist.
My dad bulldozed the whole herb garden into the woods, but then everything sprouted in the woods, and my sister went and took divisions of everything and put it in her backyard. I'm like,
what?
Great. So now my living bomb lives on in my sister's urban backyard in Richmond, Virginia.
Well,
she cares.
And the metaphor is true.
No, she's not talking to me right now. Anyway, she'll listen to this and maybe reach out.
But there it is. Like but there's the metaphor. Like these are true maps.
Yeah.
To what's in our souls too, is that it physically gets destroyed, it physically gets bulldozed, it gets put somewhere else, and a little piece of it is going to survive and shift. And that's what this earth is, recycling volcanic matter.
Yeah.
We are surfing on the surface of volcanic magma right now, and it's eating itself. We are eating ourselves.
This is not the direction we went when we recorded this the first time, and we lost 10 minutes of recording this.
It's true. It's true.
Like,
it's not.
But it's true. It is like, and here we are, individualized egos, embodied in the world, and we don't want to get too Taoist about it, because then some people say that's like a
spiritual bypass.
Yeah, spiritual bypass. How do you even know what is good and bad? Then if it's all energy is just neither created nor destroyed, but like constantly transforming, then therefore how is there even moral good or bad? These are the kinds
we're embodied beings, so we have to deal with the reality that we can have lofty ideals and we can have esoteric experiences and trance experiences, and we are embodied beings, and it's going to feel a certain way, and we feel different ways when we're with different people doing different things. And when we feel that crushing grief of the reality of the times we live in, if we're lucky, if we've put in a lot of time and effort also, and we're lucky, we have people and we can be held and we can be cared for and we can be tended when we need that tending. And it's not like a bank that you put in your deposit of tending someone else and then later you'll get it back, because sometimes people just need a lot more than they can give, and that's okay too. We need everybody. And
the nihilism, this is something that, as when we were very studious philosophy students, it's easy to like go through all of this really cool thought process in both the world of Eastern philosophy and Western and everything in between, and then like end up in a point of nihilism where like nothing is real and nothing exists, and there is no moral good or bad, and there is no one unified objective truth, and there is no anything, and so what do we do now? Nothing. I just lay there and cry.
When you feel like that, you know what I think nowadays? I think, try and tell that to your grandmother. Tell that to your grandmother, and try and not, if you're lucky enough to have a beautiful relationship with your grandparents, try and feel that when you're spending time. I know for you, like, dipping strawberries in cream. Or for me, when I was sitting at my, in a chair next to my grandmother as a teen and an early 20-something, like radically telling her the truth about how I was feeling for the first time and having her just love me. That's what I think of when those moments of nihilism crop up, or I encounter someone that's really in the depths of it. Or I encounter someone who is not at their best and they're being an asshole to other people. What I tend to say is, like, if your grandmother was sitting right here, right now, how would you be? How would you be?
I worry about being that old at one point and just being totally, like, isolated, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all, we all have hoped that we would be in a community setting where we all support each other, and
Yeah.
to our old age, being able to be there for one another and take care of one another and live multi-generationally, and like they don't make it easy. Maybe one day they will, because the powers that be, all of us, right, will make it easier, because realizing that it makes things function. There's, I don't know, like, how much more pain can we all cope with? Because I think a lot of people are just so depressed and upset, especially this pandemic time is exceptionally more upheaval and isolation, right? I mean, I think some people enjoyed it for a little while, and now they're like, okay, this is maddening. In a world that's already isolating, and how much more do we take? Like, you know, everything is so expensive. We have to make so much money just to even exist in this culture. And we still don't even have, like, that network around us a lot of the time that really, like, intact cultures have, you know, and we're still going to just feel that weight, you know, and it's like...
That we're all one financial emergency away from homelessness and destitution. Yeah, totally.
There's no safety net, and yet for me, I couldn't imagine really doing other kind of work than what I do, yet I'm not necessarily setting myself up financially at all to thrive into my old age. I'm gonna be screwed if I'm continuing to do what I do.
High five. Good club.
I mean, y'all live here and pay rent, but it's not like you're accumulating wealth to buy land or to buy security for yourself. And even if you did buy a house and land for yourself, it still doesn't mean you're gonna be able to stay in it till old age, you know? It's like...
No, those are not the guarantees of our generation, for sure.
No, like in
any generation.
What
right
is
now.
Security? It is community in a way, but the time we take to tend each other and the relationships, even the ones that we don't expect would be there, and yet...
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
I've had this experience lately from... there's a local family that has experienced a great tragedy in that their son has had a skiing accident and is currently paralyzed from the neck down with some functionality, and has had emergency surgeries, and it's been very hard, and their father has been making regular updates that are heart-wrenching and brutally honest and beautiful, because, you know, their son is still in there. There's no head injury involved, so, like, cognitively, he's their son, and he's a beautiful person. And what their father has come to realize is, through seeing the outpouring of support, financial support, but also some showing up physical support from the community, the way he's been terming it, he's been acknowledging, like, we don't have the financial security. We don't have the investments. We don't have the property ownership. We don't have,
even though they have
all these,
a business that thrives.
Even though they have a thriving business in town, they're actually just one of those businesses that keeps other people in good jobs, and they've truly been a service to this community for years and years. And what he's come to realize and has acknowledged in his writings through this is that that's where he's invested. That's where they've all invested. And that's what is coming out right now, is that their nest egg of security was the community. And it's still the community. And it's not a solution. It's not a fix, but it is a little bit of a balm in this modern paradigm to see situations where, even though it's wrong and it shouldn't have to be this way, that yes, the community will show up and financially support incredible expenses when there is a genuine need that's clear. And I know that there's so many genuine needs that are they're unclear, or they're not communicated well, and people don't get the support that they need. And, you know, I'll take I'll take a heartening where it comes when I see the community supporting some people. Or it's like at a baby blessing that I was at recently, where a local doula beautifully called, this room full of 50 people, loving friends all, but people who'd been in community with new mothers, new parents before and haven't shown up in a righteous way. And this doula who gives this beautiful enabling speech and orientation to everyone of, first off, we need your help, and calls us out that we haven't been there for our fellow parents and community members, and that's okay, and here's what you can do, here's how we can do it. And the feeling after that ceremony and that ritual was one that I've seen acted on, at least to some degree, more than I've seen with many other births, where people have been showing up, and there is a feeling that is grown in those kind of events, and that continued connection, that in those moments when it feels so hard, when I feel lonely or disconnected, it's not even that I think, oh, I can call on people and give support, or call on people and get support. It's that I remember, oh, there are other people who need support, and I know where they are, and I know what they're doing, and I can do that. And then I'm tied right in there. It's like if my neighbor needs help with something, then if I'm down in the dumps and my neighbor needs my help, I'm not going to be down in the dumps afterwards. I'm going to feel like I'm part of something. If I'm feeling like I've had a crazy day, but I am going to take soup over for dinner for my friends and see their little baby, I'm going to feel like I'm part of something. And I think that's it's hard and it's not a fix-all, but when we are feeling lost and hopeless, tend what we can tend, move what we can move. It's that martial art, that sistema thing of like, if you're pinned and utterly, hopelessly trapped under someone else, and all you can move is your pinky finger, and it doesn't feel like it'll help you get out from under this hold, just move your pinky finger, because that's all that you can move. And eventually, maybe something else will move. And if it doesn't, good Lord, is there wisdom in Dark Night of the Soul? There's wisdom in the deep places, and it's not like, ooh, I'm in rock bottom, I'm going to mine this for productivity later. No, it's not like that. It's a deep time, slow wisdom that is not fun, but enriches the long game of our life and the way that we show up for each other. And that's what I just really hope that we're all doing with our work, is we're just helping ourselves and each other show up for each other, but also for the earth, so that we can step up and be protectors when we actually have the capacity, and step in and plant and disturb soil and turn those seed heads upside down and pull the roots. And yeah.
I mean, I've definitely felt a lot of community sport in a lot of ways, in a really spread out way, given the network that I've woven with the podcast and like an online presence over the years, but it still feels like a void compared to other times in my life where I've experienced close-knit community in different forms in this way that you're speaking to. Like, for me, I grew up in a really unique scenario where my family had been in a place for over 6 generations, both sides, so I knew all of my first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, both sets of grandparents, 3 great-grandmothers, aunts, uncles, great-aunts and great-uncles, great-great-aunt cousins, and, like, distant family members from, my great-greats, brothers, kids, and all that, and then all the neighbors and people from church. And like, I'm growing up somewhere where I knew everyone knew me, and I knew everyone, and I had so much family around, and there was just like constant gatherings.
Yeah.
In that way, constant, like, you know, just showing up at someone's house and like, what do you need? You know, my grandpa as an elder living by himself, people were always coming by because of just that generation and that era and who he was in particular as a person. Of course, I'm like, I'm not going to have that when I'm that age, because where am I even going to be, you know? Yeah. So I feel grief, or I'll never have anything that's like that ever again. It would be very crazy unless I was with someone whose their family was like that or something. But that kind of community in place, right? And then there's been moments where, like, in college, our group, you know, and then the whole Mystic Moon group, or that we just organically formed and came together and didn't even really realize we even had community until we all went off and did our own thing, and we're like, oh God, we missed that, you know? And then my time in North Carolina for a little while, too, and having another version of that in a sense, and seeing people show up for each other in ways there, and not, you know, certain people have really felt like no one showed up for them, even though they have friends everywhere, which is interesting. And it's scary to be in a place and time where you don't feel like that's happening and you really want it, and you've tried to create that again, or really trust bonds, or really trust work with people, or trust that you're putting a lot of effort into like relating in relationships. And yet I still wonder if that would happen for me or you, right? If one of us had a crisis, ultimately, you know. I mean, a crisis like that one you're describing, you know, that's scary to me to think about. And yet,
yeah, I hear that.
It's part of it all. I don't know.
The darkness around us is deep. I can't recite it. I wish I could. I think if I were a better person I could, but there's a William Stafford poem. I think it's called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. And it's like, if I forget who I am and you forget who you are, how are we going to get through this together? And the darkness around us is deep, and I'm butchering it, I'm sure, but I just, in what you're saying, I feel that there is that heartful connection that we have all experienced some species of, and that there's no guarantee of it in the future, and that we're not necessarily setting ourselves up for it because of the way we're living.
But even people who do, like, seeing where I grew up, other older people or people my parents' generation being really isolated feeling, because they did the nuclear family unit thing. They spent all their time with one person. They have people they know around and things going on, but everyone's busy trying to just make money and trying to survive, right? And I've witnessed people, when their partner dies, they're just in the house, and they're retired, they're just like in their home all day alone, and no one checks on them. Even though they know all their neighbors, they have family around, they have a church, or they have, you know, the yoga class or whatever, but like that might be the only time they see anyone is when they go to the yoga class. Like, I've seen that too.
You gotta stop by and say hello in there.
You know, like
Jillian Welch song.
It's so intense. Yeah, I don't know. It was something that I was thinking of earlier that I mentioned, and then it didn't get recorded, and I don't even know if I can speak to it in the same way. We had like a little thing where we had to reformat the recorder and start over for a 5-minute thing that didn't get recorded. Is reflecting back again on the drum circle pagan community that we found and tapped into when we were in college, and that was like our constant somatic outlet, you know, in the midst of all of our crazy intellectual meanderings and living in a really crazy post-apocalyptic urban sprawl madness place with a little patch of woods next door. How much that space was created and probably saved so many people who were living in that urban sprawl in Norfolk, Virginia, you know, and the greater Hampton Roads area. Is like the Mystic Moon building was like this hole in the wall looking place you'd drive up to, and it was like a falling down warehouse that was like a witchy store, and then the backyard was basically a fenced-in area surrounded by industrial factories and stuff like that, and they had like planted fruit trees back there and pulled up literal pavement in order to put this drum circle thing in so people could dance and move and like have catharsis on actual earth in the middle of this horrible feeling sprawl. But for some of these people, and they would practice these very earth, you know, these rituals that were so about tuning into the cycles of the earth. And of course, then there would be like styrofoam being used and stuff there, and we would always be like, oh, God,
Yeah,
they're doing these,
eating pizza and soda and stuff like that.
and drinking out of styrofoam cups, and we're like, but you're supposed to care about the earth, you know?
It was cognitive dissonance, and we couldn't. That was a barrier for me. Yeah, that was part of my judgy brain. Was like, ugh, God, I don't understand how these things go together.
But for some of these people, like, yeah, the world they had to exist in every day, this was the thing that kept them alive.
Yeah, it's survival. It's the same thing as in. I was just doing a trauma-informed training yesterday for some of the work that I do, and you know, one of those key principles is that behavior is a survival mechanism, and you're only doing what you can. Mm-hmm. And what it looks like, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that something has happened in your life, and this is what it looks like right now. And so for some people that looks like self-soothing through different food choices. And there's also just that relative thing of like, people are coming from everywhere, you know, from different angles in different ways. And our social group had totally gotten on the really healthy food kick also. Like I know I was into like raw food, and, you know, we were dumpster diving fresh fruits and veggies all the time. And so, of course, when we went into a space where it was a lot of junk food. I mean, now I look at it and I'm like, oh, junk food, what a treat. Okay, like if it's there, I will probably eat some. And it's not what I want to live on, but yeah, I don't feel like. Yeah, I feel like I was a mental jerk when I was judging them, sitting by a bookshelf filled with the most amazing books in the entire world, and they're eating junk food, and there's an incredible somatic ritual going on outside.
We've thought about it more now as we've gotten older, and really see the value of what it was and what it still seems to be. I think they're still doing it, you know.
And they're just lovely, lovely people, just such nice, caring people the whole way through, you know, that were welcoming, righteously welcoming, and they saved lives. All those people saved lives. They saved ourselves. They've saved themselves, and of course there's drama. Yeah, there's drama. It's community. That's what humans do. We get together and we fight and we betray and we have delicious sex and we have stimulating conversation and we have cuddle puddles and we have art parties and we fuck up real hard and we get called out and we repair and we come back, and sometimes somebody gets pruned off because it doesn't feel safe for them to be around, and all of this stuff happened in intact, idealized, never existed cultures of our imagination too. Yeah. Like, this is what we humans do, and I don't. Yeah.
What is intact? I mean.
What is it? Yeah.
Well,
I don't have enough letters after my name to claim that I know what that means. Mm-hmm. I don't think they do either.
After we had our experience in college, which is where we met, and we dated for a couple of years at one point, and then you did a big music project for a couple of years that started in college organically as y'all doing these almost theater performances with your music. And I remember recording them with an old-fashioned recorder. I don't even know where those tapes are, any of it. It's on YouTube still, somewhere. And then Jake put them on YouTube, these videos of y'all playing at these open mics around
campus, and then it just kept evolving. And one of your bandmates was an ethnomusicologist, so like he brought a lot of energy of like interesting cultural or just like instrument.
Red Tail Hawk is back.
Yeah, that's awesome. There was, you know, also our little group of friends hanging out all the time. All those instruments were always around, and your band kind of like was a part of. It was just evolving in its childlike, non-formed state when we were in college. And yeah, like that. Even the name of your music project was sort of a joke at first, I think, and then it turned into a thing for a little while.
Oh, Momentary Prophets? I don't know that it... I mean, it was all a joke, but it was deadly serious, and it wasn't a joke at all. It was just... Yeah, its gestation was totally in this performance art, absurdist, like, the truest mockery of established cult-like ritual and performance art, and yet in the absurdism was truth. And it grew from that performance art into, I believe, after we graduated and when we went on the road for a couple of years, traveling the East Coast and exclusively playing music, yeah, it felt like a community-driven instigation project because that's what we'd seen happen at school. Is like we had this band and we had this social group and they were intertwined and...
But all kinds of people would enjoy your music who weren't in the so-called group.
Totally. But there felt, it felt like there was this generational energy that was happening there, and we saw people coming together around this music. And so when we went out on the road, it felt like, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and as a whole, we talked about this kind of thing all the time. I mean, we were, self-referential dorks. I mean, we were deep into ourselves, but in, I think, a relatively clean way, where we were really doing it because we loved seeing the effect of people coming together. And then we'd circle back a few months later after coming to a place, and like maybe we just played an open mic, and then we get a show a couple months later, and there's the people that were at the open mic, and now they have more of them, and they're telling us about this thing that now they're doing, and and they're living in this group house, and they're doing this thing now, and they're doing this thing now, and then we would go and visit like intentional communities, and through that connection with Mystic Moon and that pagan community, ending up out in Ohio with the Wisteria community, which was just another like an exponential elaboration, I feel like, on some of those
actually in the woods
beautiful relationships and activities. And that there was something truly special that I it's the whole lightning in a bottle thing. Like we caught something and we helped share it for a time, and for much of that time, it was so fulfilling. It would, at the end of a show, I would just feel so filled up from all of the people that were there and were dancing and singing, and then after the show, like the giant hug party, because we made ourselves available for hugs, and so many people wanted to hug and connect, and I would just feel so filled up. Until I didn't anymore. Until there were a lot of things going on in my life.
It's stressful
in the last...
to be living in a van.
Yeah, living in a van.
Two other
living on
dirty boys.
we were all just three dirty boys. Sleeping on a sitar and a stand-up bass. Just kidding, Jake. I never slept on the sitar. That never happened. But you should have had a hard case for it, not a soft case. And we all know that's true.
Oh, man.
But there definitely was this point where we'd been on the road for a couple of years, and we'd made a second album, and we spent some time more centered around Virginia because my mother went through chemotherapy with cancer, which Spoiler alert, she recovered from entirely, no need to worry about her.
Well, that was
Also, spoiler alert, we filled her up with tons of raw foods and bone broths and chaga mushrooms, and when she had the eventual mastectomy at the end of all of that, her oncologist looked at the breast and was like, I can't find any cancer. I have never in my career seen the level of cancerous tissues that you had disappear the way that these have.
I never knew that.
Yeah. So
That was a hard winter.
There's a sample size of 1. However, chaga, reishi, lots of some
We were
maitake and bone broths and raw foods, and that's what happened.
We were really vegan oriented at that moment in time, but we went and took her to Thai Sophia at the time, because we had a friend going to school there and they were doing these clinical things. It's like a school where you can get an herbal medicine master's or something, and they were looking for people to do clinic consultations with, and your mom was like, all right, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were pretty much like, no, you need to eat bone broth.
Yeah.
All of the raw food stuff's cool and all, but you need to cook more stuff, and you need to eat
Yep.
And we were like, all right.
Yeah.
So we were like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
But that was an intense winter of. You think I would have learned my lesson then that living with parents is never. I mean, your parents are wonderful in a lot of ways and quirky and living in their crazy cabin in their basement.
And
But
you're quirky
I
in your
repeated.
own way.
Oh yeah, I tried to organize
Totally.
their cabinets all the time and
Yeah.
got couldn't control my environment, so I
Uh-huh.
would be all of a sudden it's such a mess. But yeah, and then many other times after that, I tried to live with partners and parents, and it never went well. So you think by now I would know, but it wasn't that it was bad. Because they might be listening to this right now, too. And, I mean, it was hard for all of us. Just your mom going through a hard experience with her body and just
Mm-hmm.
facing potentially dying. And then you being on the road and me having lived in New Hampshire. And all of a sudden we're all in the house together. And your dad's working on it at the same time. And it's winter and it's just a hard time, and what's going to happen with Momentary Prophets? I don't know. And what am I going to do? Do I follow you or not? And yeah, it was intense. And I thought that was a dark night of the soul moment, but no.
It's all relative, right?
It's all relative.
Rock bottom has rocks under it.
Plants saved me then, because we started a cold frame and growing food, and
Mm-hmm.
you started getting into the distance learning program, the John Yun.
Yeah, it was the Kamana program.
Kamana thing.
Yeah.
And that was probably really therapeutic for you. I got a job at the time. That was probably the last job where I went and showed up. Oh no, I had a little bit. I did some stuff after that. But, and then working for an herbalist at the time up there, and
Yeah.
plants helped us.
They did.
Both.
Well, and I feel like animals helped me. I feel like plants helped you and animals helped me.
Because you started getting into birding and stuff like that then too.
Well, it was even when I was out on the road. We'd still go on little mini. We'd play a show here and there during that time, and there was this one night where, gosh, I think we were in Indiana, and we played at this little bar. We didn't normally play in bars, but we played at this little bar, and it's a fine show. And afterwards, I just had this feeling of I don't actually want to spend more social time with people. I need to get outside. And so I walked outside, and this bar is kind of on the edge of a residential neighborhood. And there was one of those little ravines, like a riparian kind of ravine with big old trees in it. And I found myself just standing on the edge of it, in the moonlight, in the cold, just standing there, quietly, listening to the trees, and could see lights through the trees of the neighborhood beyond. And I heard this rustling, and it was kind of close to me in the dead leaves on the ground. And I heard this and got a little quieter as it went down the hill of the ravine. And I thought, what the hell is that? And I was looking, and of course I couldn't see anything. And then I heard this animal get to the bottom of the ravine and then start going up the other side. And I thought, if I run, I could get to the spot that it's going to come out. And so I started running, and I run around this little peninsula of woods on the road, and I cross the culvert, and I'm going around the other side, and I realize I have to go through people's backyards to get to where this animal is, and there's not fences in the way, so I just do it. It's like 11:30, 12 o'clock at night on a weeknight, like nobody's up. And so I'm just skulking through backyards, listening really intensely. And I get to the spot, and I can hear the getting louder, and this, all of a sudden, a skunk walks out of the woods 5 feet in front of me. And it's a big, beautiful striped skunk, like a big kind of fat, weaselly thing. And they walk away from me as if they hadn't even seen me. And I just followed. I just instinctively followed them. I just was so drawn to this being, and I followed this skunk between 5 and 10 feet behind them for like a half an hour, as the skunk just goes in and out of all these backyards in this neighborhood and goes under this fence here, and I have to go around the yard, and they find another way through the fence, and I just keep along with this skunk. And every once in a while the skunk will turn and kind of look and see that I'm there, and then just keep going and not really care, just ambling along, sniffing around. Until finally the skunk goes underneath the deck of this house. And I almost crawled under the deck. That's how disconnected my brain was from just the obvious fear of like, skunk, scary, like could spray you, and that'll be a bad scene for lots of reasons. And I just sat there for a few minutes, and then kind of came to my senses and realized I was in the middle of a residential neighborhood, sitting in the middle of somebody's yard in the middle of the night. And I left. And when I got back to the bar, my bandmates are still there talking with people, and I didn't feel like I could share that story with anyone and have them actually understand the felt connection, the felt pull there. And the next day, I made a point of going back to that neighborhood and going and knocking on the door of that house, and had this little exploratory conversation with this woman to see if she would want to know that there was a skunk under the back of her deck. And eventually I thought that it would be okay, and so I said, "Did you know that there's a skunk that lives underneath your deck?" And she said, "Oh yeah, you saw the skunk? Oh, I love the skunk. It was just, that's my friend," and blah, blah, blah. And I realized in that interaction, like, I need to be interacting with this kind of person. I need more of this in my life. And I think that was that was the feeling, those were the kinds of experiences that started to pull me west out towards Wilderness Awareness School, and nature connection on the whole was just animate nature reaching out and saying, "Hello, you're here too, and we want you to interact and be a part of this land, and not just travel upon it." So that was kind of what started pulling me out.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was nothing like that in Virginia, or that you knew that was a facilitation for learning more. In that same way, there isn't. There is a little bit.
There's stuff that I didn't know existed that was much closer than Washington State, and there's amazing people doing incredible stuff. I mean, if you're in Virginia hearing this, you should go say hi to Living Earth School and Hub and Kate and a dear friend, Erin
I still have
Campbell.
never really gone there or explored it.
They're doing absolutely phenomenal stuff there, absolutely. And that was just down in Charlottesville. Like I could have gone and connected there, but I didn't know they existed. And that's the thing that we encounter all the time in our lives, is once we get into something, like you find out, oh, my neighbor over there is a beekeeper? Wait, what? Or, oh, this person who I've seen at the hardware store, oh, wait, they were a raft guide for years and have facilitated rites of passage in the desert, or Vision Quest or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You find out these things once you have a lens to see it and notice it and care about it, you know. So East Coast, didn't deserve abandoning, and I'm so grateful that I ended up on the West Coast doing what I did there and connecting in with those communities and meeting the people that I met there and strengthening those relationships and being mentored by just some of the best naturalists, just some of the most somatically informed people that I've ever met are out there. And yeah, that never would have happened if I hadn't been sitting on the porch listening to Seeing Through Native Eyes by John Young, which is, an old tape series that when he says seeing through native eyes, he means your own eyes. He means becoming indigenous to place through connection. Sitting there listening while my mom is laying on the couch in chemo brain nap, and I'm listening to him talk about the phenomena of crows and red-tailed hawks, and how crows will, of course, mob and antagonize hawks. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I've seen that kind of thing before, maybe. And then he goes on to say, but there's this special thing that happens. And maybe this was in advanced bird language. Maybe this wasn't in... I forget which of his tape series this was, but he talks about how not only will they mob them and fly after them and peck at them while they're flying and even land on their back and surf on the hawk for a second, they'll also fly ahead of the hawk, cawing or silent, but exactly in the trajectory the hawk is going, and basically be alarming ahead to spread the message through the forest. The hawk is coming, the hawk is coming. And I'm sitting there listening to it, and a crow flies by. And I think, oh, that's funny. I'm listening to this tape here, and there's a crow flying in the air, and synchronicity. Dude, total synchronicity, dude. Like, life is amazing. Oh my god. Fibonacci sequence, dude. Like, that's what's going on in my head. And John keeps talking, and he talks about how, sometimes it'll be one or maybe two or even a few crows and there goes another crow. I think, another crow. That's funny. He says, and then the hawk will come, and then a freaking red-tailed hawk flies by, and I just stand up on the deck, and I just point, and I just say out loud, like, those are crows flying in front of red-tailed hawks. And my mom kind of wakes up, and I go over to her and I say, Mom, you gotta listen to this. Like, I was just listening to this tape right now, and it's talking about crows and how they fly above the red-tailed hawk, and the end of head of it, and there it's happening, right? You can still see them. There they go over there. And... yeah, and that feeling in my body, like, I can joke about, synchronicities, dude, like, ecstatic everything, oh my god, consciousness expansion, and, yeah, I can satirize that, and it's not true. And
I've had some of those in my life, too, and I'm like, whoa.
And they're major signposts, and when do you notice them? When you're noticing other things. The more you're aware of... I believe the more I am aware of my relationships in nature, the more I notice those incredible synchronicities and like just those ridiculous moments that if you were trying to make an argument for a clockwork universe of just randomness, like, yeah, those things don't happen very much. And you can make beautiful, elegant neurological arguments for our bias of noticing, and we notice what we notice and make meaning out of anything, but the lived experience of synchronicities like that, where I was listening to a tape that was decades old at that point, and it happened in front of me, it physically felt a certain way. And there have been so many moments like that where they just stick out like little beacons, little signposts that say, yes, keep correct going. Road, keep going. Exactly, keep going. And you can ask yourself that question, what is this telling me? And what are you going to answer? You're going to answer something that's true for you, that's probably meaningful. Does it matter that it is objectifiable, quantifiable, empirically repeatable? No, does not matter at all. will it make meaning and guide you? Also, it's BS if you think it's not repeatable, because go to some nature connection communities where they're doing amazing multi-day overnight programs, putting people into trance states and highly connective states, and what do you get at the end of that program? You get a hell of a lot of people with ridiculously synchronistic stories that are pointing them towards exactly what is important in their lives. It's all messy, and it doesn't gel well with reductionist science, but it's technology. It's just technology.
And something beyond us that we'll never understand fully is that's flowing around, that's not necessarily palpably experienced all the time in the way that we're told that we're supposed to be experiencing things,
Yeah.
It seeps through, and yet it's tricky to be really aware of those things sometimes when they pop up, and then have them guide you, and not everyone else around sees it the same way, or it can be scary even sometimes when it's happening and you see it so clearly, and yet there's this big part of our world that tells us to resist those things too, like, oh yeah, whatever,
Oh yeah, that's not true, and if you think it's true, you must be crazy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we find each other.
Yeah.
To catch each other's stories and say, nope, you're on the right track. That's what that means.
Some people say that and some people don't, but yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like you do for me also.
Yeah, I tend.
I have strong opinions when prompted, and I think that there's something about this conversation and conversations with you in general that, because you are so oriented towards philosophical interest and pontificating and teasing things apart, and you've got that big spaghetti brain of, oh, you just said this one thing and it's touching 17 other pieces of spaghetti in my brain, and they all weave around and it's all one piece of spaghetti.
I've been doing that a long time.
Yeah, but what that brings out in me, and what I feel like when I hear your podcast and I hear other people talking, I feel like it brings out that particular interconnectivity, the interstitial spaces, and it brings it out in me, because I feel like in my life, honestly, when I'm not working with kids right now and I'm interacting with people, I don't really give my opinion or stories or experiences all that much anymore. At least not the way I used to. I feel like I used to talk a whole lot and feel like I had some stuff figured out, and I had an important worldview that, and this is a lot of like the teenager that had read every Daniel Quinn book, and was just like, the dominator culture, and everyone's a taker and no one's a leaver and no one knows about this, oh my god, and now I'm like, oh shit, well, a lot of people know about it, but everyone skipped the part where they thought to do something about it, and everyone just thinks everyone's screwed now.
Or you tried and failed, or it's harder than you thought it was going to be,
Yeah. And so I just find myself, when I'm interacting with people, I just want to hear their stories, and I want to find out what matters to them and where their connection is, and meet them there and just swim in that zone. So when I talk to you, it's like, oh my god, everything is connected and this person gets it, so like we can just go and really dive deep on some stuff.
You're one of the people that just introduced me to that writer, Sophie Strand, that people who are listening to the podcast maybe have heard of.
God, she's amazing.
And I want to read more and listen to her own podcasts and stuff, but there's one thing she wrote on Instagram the other day that I just kind of started skimming through, because she posts a lot of her writings in her Instagram, like in the part that you can write the description in, like I do that too sometimes, but then she also has essays and things she publishes everywhere. And a book coming out.
Yeah, I can't wait till her books come out this year.
Just a little bit of that I have read, I'm like, wow, this person really articulates this well, like non-duality and interconnection and queerness in the sense of, the symbol of the yin-yang or something, or like everything is bits and pieces of every other side of it all in all woven, like the way that she articulates it is so I'm like, yes. And there's this one that she wrote about the spider, and this trying to demonstrate for us as humans reading this that our bodies are like this too, you know, except it looks different, but we forget, right? This is the same forgetting or the same disconnection that we've been talking about this whole time. Is like the spider is in the web, and like if a bug gets caught in the web, it like knows in its body on the other end of the web that there's some, it like perceives it in its actual neurology that there's a bug on the other side of the web, even if that's a really far end of the web, you know. It's the web, it and the web are living together. Like, it is, the body of the spider is also the web. And then if something tragic happens to part of the web, like part of it gets really damaged, it she said in the piece, like, it's like a lobotomy in the spider. It's almost like
damages that neurology.
It really messes up, and the spider either goes and tries to fix it, but it maybe isn't exactly as good as it was, and it just, the spider seems disoriented, and, you know, it can change the spider's behavior. And then just kind of taking that and being like, go and lay on the ground and take the ecology, I forget the way that she exactly said it, take the ecology of the music of the ecology around you and let it transmute itself into your body, or something like that, like, because it is your body too. There's communication happening that you don't even understand.
It's physically true.
Just like the spider web and the spider have communication that you aren't even saying, oh, we're communicating together. It's just happening. And that's part of what we're getting at here too in this, is like...
And I feel like what you're getting at here is that it's so important for us to know that it doesn't happen in thinking thought. And that's what our culture is so oriented towards, is discursive thought as wordplay. And our bodies are taking in astronomical amounts of information that have nothing to do with words. Our senses, the horn, like smelling, tasting, touching, sight, we're really sight focused, but close your eyes for 10 minutes and walk around and feel stuff, and you're going to start experiencing that you are cognitively aware of things you weren't before. And there's so much that we're taking in through touch.
It's the somatic piece. And sometimes it's like, well, how do I somatically get through my trauma? Well, it's just not that simple always, you know?
Neutrinos are passing through the entire Earth. Literally, like, they just, the other day...
What are neutrinos?
Neutrinos are tiny particles that they were only theorized to exist for a long time, but they're so small that they literally pass through everything. And so they just turned like basically the equivalent of a telescope that can perceive neutrinos at the ground. They aimed it at the ground at night, which means they were aiming it at the sun, and they came up with a picture of the sun because there's neutrinos literally passing from the sun through the entirety of the Earth. And that's happening physically to our bodies all the time with every being that we interact with, like every plant, every bit of soil, every piece of
that is where quantum physics, which is science,
it's all scientifically supported,
intersects with Eastern philosophy and this whole idea that we can't measure necessarily these things. I mean, that's what the Heisenberg principle is, or some shit, right? Like
the speed and location.
You can't know the speed of an atom. Yeah, you can't know the speed of an atom and the location at the same time. Yeah. Right. Well, that's really based off of an older.
It's also true for our hearts.
That's really based off of something older and more esoteric that existed before some guy named Heisenberg put his name on it.
Right, you can't step in the same river twice.
This is the stuff we were saying to each other a lot in college. Like,
we come back, we run out of our classroom, we run up to the tree, and we're like, Kelly, you can't step in the same river twice. And you look down and you say, you can't step in the same river once.
But that's actually what the koan says.
Yeah.
Because the river isn't actually a river, an entity, it's just constant movement, and that's what everything is.
What is a body? It's a multiplicity, and Sophie Strand articulates this so beautifully, and I think that part of it is her affinity, I would say, like, co-conspiracy with the mycorrhizae, with mycelium and fungi. Yeah. She writes beautifully at length about that, and there's, they are literally, physically, our both overlords and most intimate partners on this earth. Because, there's many lenses you could look at that through, but like if you want to say, oh, look at one of those mass extinction events where basically everything died, and then the biggest embodied being that came back was enormous fungi. And it was fungus that took over the earth. And so as species evolved, literally, you couldn't do anything as a species unless you were intimately connected with the fungi. And we look around today and, shifting baseline theory, super, hot buzzwords right
Which
there.
has been on the podcast a little bit talking about that.
Yeah. So if we look around now, we look around and we're like, well, I can't see the mycorrhizae, so I don't really understand that it's there. And that's the way I lived my life for a long time. But actually, everything is connected underground. And it's not this survival of the fittest exclusively, dog-eat-dog competitive thing. It's resource sharing, and it's intelligent. It is they, and they are making choices, intelligent choices, and science is finding this out. Doing with everything from, coding coding nutrients and watching them move to a sick tree from a healthy tree through the network of mycelium. That's a pretty well-known example, but yeah, oh my god, slime mold solving mazes.
But interconnection is scientifically measurable to a point. It
Yeah.
isn't just some philosophical idealism. It is
No.
real, yet what is it?
And it's possible to be ungrounded and out of touch with reality and make silly choices because you're walking around saying, oh, my intentions are really good, man. So, I'm just holding love in my heart. And so, gee whiz, bad stuff can still happen to you.
Well, there's also,
even with that.
I mean, the science-religion duality split thing to... So this is where science can become spiritual, but yet the what is that called? The
Pseudoscience.
the philosophers that talked about materialism and there's no spirit in the material. Oh, what's his name? Not Hegel, but I don't remember. Just that material is just material and there's no spirit behind it. Basically, that split between the spirit and the body is what is basically informing capitalism and all the disconnect and stuff too.
Sure.
And all of
Do you
these.
mean
Who was it?
Sartre, like the Cartesian split.
Descartes, I think.
Descartes. That's what I meant, not Sartre. Descartes. Cartesian.
I mean, I'm a little rusty on all these old white guy philosopher, but it's helpful to look at this too because these are the things that this is what comes in hand when talking about invasive plant philosophy and science and. When talking about wild tending and anthropogenic landscapes, all these things that we kind of get at on the podcast in different ways, is we have to look back into that. And you study history, so there's this too, wrapping it back around to why, you started off studying history because you understood why it was so important to look at, and you were given that little seed,
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't look at that, to a degree, even though history doesn't give us the full picture.
No.
We won't understand what it is about that's informing what we're feeling intuitively, emotionally, somatically off now. And so realizing that there is a reason why we are told that it's crazy to go sit under a tree and feel like it's a part of our literal body.
Yeah. And you don't have to go back very far, and you don't have to go very far from wherever you're sitting to find just the reality that animism is normative consciousness. That animism is, as not a dogma, just as a lived experience, is that's the actual human baseline. The world over. No matter what the religious tradition looks like now, follow it back, you get to the point of animacy, all and interrelationality and dependence and codependence.
We're awkwardly trying to grasp at that. Because we don't, it's not like it's completely gone from our being, right? Obviously, we were co-evolved to be interconnected in that way. Our bodies literally are meant to be touching soil and being with other people touching soil and feeling these ways that the trees or the plants or the rocks are extensions of ourselves as like a baseline for what it meant to be human for most of the time that humans have been humans. So it's not like it's not a crazy thing to be grasping at that, but like it is awkward feeling sometimes the way that we go about it, like kind of grasping at something in the past that we can hold on to or what we can consider an intact culture now, and sometimes doing harm by doing that. And it's like, what's right in front of us feels too painful sometimes to actually encounter. Like having to work under fluorescent lights in an office building your whole entire life to be able to have so-called security when then you retire and sit in your home by yourself and no one comes to visit you. And then you end up at a nursing home, and all the money you made in that fluorescent lit building your whole life is what pays for you to sit in another fluorescently lit room. And I know it sounds pretty depressing when I say it like
this
that.
This has been Rays of Hope with Kelly Moody.
But, I mean, yeah. Yeah, that's just been my dark night of the soul time I've been in lately, informing or like kind of seeping in, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
And
and there's nothing that does my cynicism better than encountering someone who's in it deeper. I'm just like, well, gosh darn, I've got bootstraps for my own self right here, because look at this person.
But at least
they need some help
right now.
Yeah.
We're laughing.
It's nice. Well, and I mean, I think it's funny. Yeah, it's because there's bleakness, there's tragedy, there's darkness, and there's also beauty the whole way through. It's turtles all the way down. It's beauty all the way down. And
that's something you've been saying a long time. It's turtles all the way down.
I didn't write it.
Who wrote it? I don't even know where that came from.
I don't know. I don't remember if it's Rumi or what. It's an old. It's a koan.
It's like the dolls and the doll. What are they called?
Well,
the doll inside the doll.
I'll butcher it. It's So the story goes that the master is sitting with the student and the master's telling the story of creation, and there's a turtle that everything is on the back of this enormous turtle. Everything that has ever been created. And the, it's like the Dark Tower series. It's gone. That's where he got this idea from too. And the student has this, snarky gotcha question of like, well, if everything is on the back of the turtle, what's the turtle on? And the master says, well, it's turtles all the way down.
That's something I asked a lot in my comparative philosophy and religion classes, studying like Zen Buddhism and Taoism and Sufism and stuff like that. I would be like, but what's outside of the circle?
Yeah.
If there's a circle, that means there's something on the other side of it to make it a circle itself, right?
Well, what sacred geometry says? Yeah, there's another. It's the awareness goes. Awareness makes a circle around itself, and then awareness travels along the circle until it gets to, and then it makes another circle, and then it travels to where those circles intersect and makes another circle, and boom, boom, boom.
And then we hit the
flower
limit.
of life, sacred geometry.
Sacred
geometry, dude. You were talking about awareness, and like it's just like, dude, it's in math, man. It's science.
You never talked like that, though.
No,
But Logan did, which is one of your bandmates, who might listen to this.
He did.
A little bit.
He was self-aware. I use that voice when I'm parodying I think everyone deserves to have a laugh at themselves. I think that's a really healthy thing, and I'm not, basically, if you ever hear me I'm like, dude, bro, oh my god, bro, synchronicity, dude, it's just because I actually feel that way, and I'm trying to keep myself a little grounded while I start floating off in the air.
I mean, we hit the limits of our minds in all of this, too, yet our minds are connected to our bodies and to what's not able to be spoken through with words, too, right? Yeah. So we're trying to grasp at that through language, and we're trying to grasp at that here in this, and Yet, there are limitations to that, including what's on the other side of what's the turtle sitting on, or what's on the other side of the circle, and we don't know how to talk about that.
No.
And I'm wondering why, if you clicked your finger because you're thinking.
I made a connection.
To music or to.
No. Well, yeah, actually, yes, it is through music, but I've come to understand the role of trickster and. Like more in the Heyoka tradition also. Many cultures have the sacred trickster who is, in medieval culture you have the jester who's the only one who can make fun of the king to their face. But that's an old tradition that goes back way farther, and you have, in certain cultures you have the, the backwards dancer, the person who goes through the most important sacred ritual of the year, and they do it backwards. And they take a crap on the floor or something in the middle of it. They do something transgressive. They mock the people that are, most important. And there's an aspect there that it's generative. There's a beautiful book called Trickster Makes the World that goes into that a lot, of the ways in which the trickster role really helps form culture, and all of this comes back to, for me, actually, what Momentary Prophets was doing when we started, because we were we were this performance art thing, and we would, over these beautiful progressive acoustic songs, spout nonsense about Lord Glebe and the electric and the Buffalo Floam, which unmade and made the universe in the great Feldsbury ukulele cowbell. And there is the Floam, and there are all these aspects of this fake religious dogma that we came up with.
Which was a coyote.
And it was
archetype. You didn't even know at the time.
We didn't know what it was, but what were we pointing at? We were pointing at righteous truths about reality, and the absurdism and the contradictions of well, yeah, if there's a gestational thing that's making the universe, well, it's unmaking it at the same time. Does that make sense? No, my brain exploded. But is it true? Yes, and let's act like it's dogma. And in that way, yeah, way back then, we were just intuiting, because of the total banality and vanilla nature of the dominator culture, we intuited the need. And so
the immediate
this
world we
trickster
lived
being,
in.
Yeah.
This weird college that was transforming from a Japanese architectured, very kind of more interested in nature flow type of college campus, to columns and
oh yeah,
Christian.
Neo-Greco-Roman Christian, valiant Christian soldiers.
Yeah, let's knock down all the old and put up all new, and so white, and so, I don't know.
Yeah, and gross and sterile, not alive, disconnected, and dangerous, existentially dangerous to us. And so what happens? This inoculant grows in us, this mycorrhizal, mutually connected, creative force came up, and it was righteous and transgressive, and it was trickster. And trickster shows up when things are too stable, or things aren't going quite the right way. And that looks different in all of our lives in different ways.
I'm motioning to him on something I'm not going to say out loud.
And there's subtext for all of us. Yeah, and it's not necessarily comfortable. It's not what I'm
no, it can
lovingly
fucking hurt really hard.
Yeah, I'm lovingly remembering right now. I'm just noticing this connection in my life, and it doesn't look pretty all the time. It's literally the creative force that makes the earth and makes our lives.
It's a wildfire that comes through and burns the whole forest that you've been tending your whole life.
Totally.
And something will sprout. Inevitably, and it will be freaking lush as all heck at first.
And it'll be totally different than what it looked like in a way that you can't predict. It might be very similar also.
Collaboration with,
It might be very similar, but you don't know what it's going to look like when things...
God. I wanted to speak to this real quick. we've been skipping around a lot, and part of this is your life journey. Part of it's us getting into our philosophical musings and where we were then and where we are now with it, and where our lives have taken us, and us deconstructing our idealism a little bit, and the things that we're still doing. You're still doing music, and you're still working with animals and plants and these ideas and things in a different new way, in a whole different place, and all of that. But the teachers we had in college, I really felt like, I loved college and thinking and the writing and the talks and all of it, I really loved the experience for me, even though sometimes I'm like, I could focus on this one thing for like 2 years as the only thing instead of also taking 6 other classes.
Good God, and economics along right with it.
Oh, well, I never had to do that, but
No,
but because you were, I guess, studying history or something,
It was for teaching.
But, maybe it's because it was a liberal arts college where I think that the field, philosophy as a field was once the main reason people went to so-called a university, and the history of what university is. Like, that was the main thing that everyone studied.
Yeah.
And it's become less and less of it's more of a sideline thing now that you get a degree in where you're not going to get a job and, whatever. Like, it were a side, like you're going to go to law school, so you take it, and that makes...
No, yeah, the essence of the liberal arts was to be a rounded thinker.
Yeah.
In
a world that doesn't necessarily appreciate or encourage that, although, in some...
Well, and originally it did, like
run-of-the-line
those thought
jobs.
leaders,
Yeah,
you go to university and then that means you're a leader. To an extent, that's still true, but it's more like checking a box now.
Yeah.
Like, yep, Ivy League, check, I can go to Congress, or I can go be part of I can be a consultant in a company and be part of the corporate, military, industrial, governmental ecocide complex.
Yeah. Well, we had these teachers, and now I look back, I'm like, oh, there's definitely things that are missing that I wonder now if they're doing differently, or, but we had this really cool group of teachers that maybe because it was not a big college in Virginia, or one that was as hard to get into as, say, University of Virginia or something, there was less... Maybe they took themselves less seriously, they experimented more, I don't know. Or we had teachers like Kip Reddick.
They also had smaller class sizes.
Smaller class sizes.
The hugest school.
30 or under a lot of the time, 20 or under.
So we could form good relationships with them.
And
like Kip Reddick and Marcus Griffin, Gustafson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some mutual ones.
Teschner I took like so many classes with, but we just had such a cool, like, interesting group of teachers that, like, particularly Kip, as one of those people who then we could have been observing a little harder as how he basically connected with anyone.
He's a master.
His students, from the frat boys to the sports geeks to the hippies to the whoever geek, the what do you call it, the people doing the role playing, like, whatever,
D&D.
Everybody loved him.
Uh-huh.
And still it's like that, and yet he was the barefoot professor who used to be homeless, hiking around America, and like has, like, I don't know, been in the military. He had spent years of his life living on the road and wore that on his sleeve, this energy about him, done the Appalachian Trail. That's like his main work, was studying pilgrimage on the Appalachian Trail, and took students who'd never been done anything like that out there every year. And this informed his teaching, and he was relatable because of these crazy experiences, but it wasn't like he only was cool to the hippie kids.
I think that now, having been an educator for a long time, I think that I have sussed out a little thing about what made him so good, and it's because he didn't assume that his experiences meant that we like him. It's that he led with connection. He wanted to be connective, and so he told awesome stories that we related to, because we were, he could tell stories that he knew we would relate to, but what is that doing? he made a safe space for us. So we're in our brainstem and we feel safe. And then he would make an emotional connection that would make it clear that like he's been where we've been. And he wants to know where we're at now, which means we matter, which means our emotional brains feel very comfortable and like we are connected to him. And then, boom, we can go into our executive brain and we can really geek out over content. And he was so kind. He was so kind and he was compassionate, and I feel like he didn't try and lead with content. I feel like Kip is one of those people that, he has so many experiences that he related to us that are very connective and very spiritual and, somatic. Like, dear Lord, he does walking. He does pilgrimage walking. What is that? That's walking trance for days on end. That is one of the oldest human things that you can do, is go on a walkabout, go on a pilgrimage yourself on your own 2 feet, where in amongst trees, away from the ins and outs and what have yous of the day-to-day mundanity of those relationships and human interactions. And where do you find yourself? You might find yourself in a specific religion at the end of that. That doesn't mean it's wrong. You're still having lived experience that gets you there, that is profound and relevant to you. I think when we were in college and we heard Christian, we just had the giant warning flags go up of like, that causes harm, that has destroyed this culture and that culture, and this and is violent in this way. And
I was really into Gnostic Christianity though, even when I was in high school and took college classes on theology, and realizing the dynamicness of it even then, and no one knew that I was the heretic or whatever in the class when I was taking it.
That you thought God was under that stone and leaf as well.
But I kept it quiet, even though I would argue with my classmates about it in school, but I kept it quiet when I was taking the classes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was interested in the Gnostic stuff even then, but, and even over the years since, I've encountered people who really feel like for their identity or for their understanding of the world, that if you're not really mean about being anti-Christian, which is like, of course it's not so socially okay to be anti-Muslim.
Yeah, I was going to say, you say anti-Semitic, you say anti-Muslim, people get really upset. You say anti-Christian, you have a hell of a lot of those same people that are like, yeah, fuck Christianity. It's like, what? You need to meet some nice Christians.
Yeah.
You need to go to a Methodist Eucharist or something and stand up and realize like, oh, we're doing a pagan ceremony right now.
it's so oversimplified as an easy way to rebel against what we feel oppressed by. And I think it's a too easy of a way out and a harmful way out, and so I don't know.
And we all have different levels of trauma associated with different things, and for some people the word Christian is going to just trigger so much, like running into someone who is so beautiful and nice and lives a really Jesus-y life, that like what you hear a lot of people say about like, these Christians are not living much like Jesus, which is often really true, but like you can have people that are totally living just that beautiful, pure, caring about your neighbor life that is righteous in so many ways, but if that person is also concerned because they're worried you're going to go to hell, a lot of people are going to be triggered and that won't feel safe for them. And that's okay. It's okay to not like things, but it's the attacking that, it's like fire with fire, poking eyes out, and all that, those truisms, those old adages, like, they're pretty true. And little old 16-year-old, I guess I'm an atheist because I hate Christianity, me, didn't know about that at that point and had a lot of growing to do. So in this experience of being an embodied human, of having these myriad connections with the land and with each other and within ourselves, as a musician, I've found that I've shifted a lot from what I'm intending the music to do. Like when I was talking about Momentary Prophets, like there's this big beautiful like cumulative effect that I felt like we were having, and I still loved those songs and believed in them and loved crafting them with Jake and Logan, and like I loved the composition part of that, and then performing these tight compositions, and then the community effect that was happening. And what I find now in my life when I play music is what I'm playing, I'm actually trying to shift the brain state of whoever's hearing it. I tend to be playing more long form, whether it's with looping layers and just big epic soundscapes and reversed things and things that go away and come back, but it's all, there's a repetitive element that is meant to shift the brain state. And even when I'm sitting down and just playing with an acoustic instrument, I still find that that's what I'm doing, is I'm shifting myself. And
as a kind of religious practice for yourself and for your offering.
It is, and the time that it works the best and I feel the most connected is when I totally forget to hit record on something and I play something and it is the best thing I've ever played in my life. It's brilliant. It satisfies all of my dorky little understandings of music and what I know I like, but it also is somatically expressive and I feel myself transported, and then I'm somewhere else and I'm also here and it's being informed by the juniper trees and the fox tracks and the all of these beings, and they're all there and it's all there together, and then when it finishes, there's nothing left of it except that it's traveled out into all of those beings and it's in me. And it's not recorded and it's not going to go up on my Patreon, and I'm so sorry to all of you who want to hear it, and
well, that whole
I'm sorry.
Thing that the body is, like what Sophie Strand was writing about, and the spider and the spider web, and like the music being played into you by intentionally taking that time to transmute or listen to what's already happening, and then the music is like a translation and sending back out, right? Like,
yeah.
We all have ways we might do that at art, or maybe some of us don't have enough ways to do that, and that seems like something that you've really kept consistent in your life ever since I've known you. I mean, you have a lot more tools than you had when I first knew you. In this room right now, looking around, I'm like, I have all kinds of cool stuff to make music with.
I do, and I've gone down the rabbit hole in some of it, in sometimes helpful, sometimes not helpful ways. Like, I loved the electric guitar looping big soundscape thing, so I learned to make guitar pedals because I wanted to be able to do specific things with the sound, and I have a problem where if I go to a thrift store and I see a $7 guitar, I'm gonna pick it up and play it, and it might be the best guitar I've ever played. And I have a lot of cheap instruments around from doing that, and it's because every instrument wants to play something different. You can have two guitars made by the same giant company in Asia. They get shipped over here. They're sitting next to each other on the shelf. You pick up one and start playing it, and if I'm listening to myself and listening to that instrument, something totally different will want to come out of that guitar than the one next to it. And that's what I've been trying to really honor in starting to make instruments and to help them to be truly vehicles for shift in myself. And I'm working towards hopefully doing this for other people too, because I've been taking right now electric guitars and either building them or taking an existing one and modifying it and taking off the finish. And one of the ways that I do art is through wood burning, and I have a whole style and philosophy around what I'm doing on there. But when I'm doing it on an instrument, what I'm trying to do is make symbols and an expression visually so that when I go to pick up that instrument is already a part of me. And I am I'm remembered myself as I pick up the instrument that this is a vehicle for this is a vehicle of transformation, and it helps me step a little bit more outside of my own ego brain of judging myself, like, well, gosh, you haven't written the best song in the world yet. Gosh, you haven't conquered the whatever that the music industry wants you to do to be heard by people, because it's so hard to be heard by people. Instead, I pick up the instrument and it reminds me this is a way to physically change my world and the world around me, which, again, science will back up that that's literally true. But, like, for instance, on the first guitar that I made, one of the most important things that I wanted was a reminder of human affecting the world. And so I did the handprint on the back of the guitar that you find in ancient caves, like all the way down to like San Bushman caves. You find the blown pigment on the back of the hand, so you get the reverse image of a hand. And it's one of the oldest pieces of art that exists in the world done by humans, unless you count landscape creation, which I'd argue that is the oldest form of art on the planet. But so when I pick up that guitar, I can press my hand into that outline and it connects me to my oldest and truest self. And what I've been playing out of the guitar is totally different than I would have played before. And my hope is that as I'm working, I have a few other projects that I'm working on right now, and my hope is that I can start translating this for other people so that other people can have an instrument that they want to be more like coded to them and imprinted on them, and they are imprinted on it, and that when they pick it up, they are ready for being transported. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the trajectory that I'm on right now, and I'm still writing lots of music and have lots of musical projects that I work on here and there. And
you've had a Patreon for a while mainly for your music, for other art forms that you do, and some of your music's just like only on there. But
yeah,
I mean, it would be cool to have some of it in this episode. And so, like, at this point, well, there'll probably have been some songs of yours played or something. But it's just one of those things where it's like, do you have a band camp where people can actually buy some of this music that you also have on Patreon?
My Bandcamp is tedpackard.bandcamp.com. And there's, what's on there is, I don't release a lot of music, but in the last 2 years I've released 2 albums. And one of them is a single track that's like 45 minutes long that is just loop after loop after loop seamlessly going into each other. So it's a big, long, somatic experience that I listen to a lot if I'm doing body work. If I'm like rolling around and stretching or something, I'll put it on because it is transportive for me. And the other album is slightly more focused. It's more like compositions that have to do with looping, and there's a few just instrumental compositions. And lately it's what I've actually released is all instrumental work. And I've got singy songs also that I love and work on and have grand visions of, that I'm getting to the point in my life where I just really recognize the incredible value of collaboration.
I hear you right there. Like, what's up?
I know you do. And I hear these songs and I have ideas and I'll come up with a bass part and a guitar part and a drum part and a keyboard part. And I know in my heart this would be better with other humans that have different ideas than me and still love my ideas and I love their ideas, and we'll make something.
That's it, right there.
Yep.
Who have different ideas but love my ideas, and it flows, right?
Yeah. And because it's music, sometimes we'll fight over an idea because we've got because we all have strong feelings about it, and that's okay too. I feel like I'm much more mature and developed than I was back in the Momentary Prophet days. I feel like I didn't understand how to be in a collaborative group in many ways at that point in my life, and I feel like I can do that.
I always wondered if y'all got back together and did a little reunion tour, what it would be like. I don't know if any of you feel like you could change your life for a couple months in that way, but a lot of people would like it. You haven't even talked to some of your roommates in a while. But.
I would love to see what that would look like, and I know that for myself and I know that it would take a lot of effort on in many different categories to make that happen. Because we would, just in terms of rehearsal time, it would take.
But if you and Jake
Oh, man.
were sitting in this room together and he was visiting you for a week, you would make some freaking cool music just by default of the way that y'all flow together.
Yeah,
You just gotta put yourselves in the same room together for a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part because he has a busy life and lives far away, and
It is, and we haven't connected on it in a long time, and
there's that too.
I feel a lot of grief around that because he's one of very few. It is a short list of songwriting collaborators that have been in my life that I've felt truly at home with, and like what has been created is the best fucking thing that's ever been created. And with Momentary Prophets, I absolutely felt that. With
timeless, some of this music, really. You could keep playing it right now and never get old.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of grief around that, and I also was the one who felt like I can't do this anymore, and I'm the one who left. And I live with that too, and I don't regret that at all. And looking at what their lives are like now, good God, I don't wish them to not have those lives, and I'm not saying they wouldn't if we had stayed together and kept touring and kept writing music and stuff, but it would have been a lot different, and it was really hard, and it was really hard to be on the road.
And be a poor musician.
And the two of them are married to the people that they were with when we were on the road, so like those relationships solidified in their lives.
Ours fell apart after that.
Ours fell apart. Yep. We
even though we were like, everyone was like, y'all will always be together, and yeah, it's funny.
And I was like, see, I'm going to the West Coast, and you're like, I guess I'm dumping you then. I was like, oh, I got dumped.
That's a simple way to put it, but
no. It was existentially terrible for a little while, just hard on us.
Huh.
Anyway, what I'm saying is that...
You mean the breaking up or the...
No, being in the relationship on the road. The distance is... We're not wired for that. And it's so challenging from... I mean, I don't know. I don't know who's listening to this, but if any of you are my friends, you know that I'm terrible at keeping in touch over distance. And it's not out of lack of love. You could argue it's from lack of initiative and caring and trying, but it's not from lack of love. We
didn't talk for like a year at one point.
It's just so hard for me to keep up with distanced connections because I feel really grounded and embodied where I am. And yeah, so it makes me sad. And I, in this...
Hello, Jake, I know you're listening.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
He might. I think he listens to my podcast. Sometimes.
Oh man, what a weird game to play. I wonder who's listening right now.
Jake, if you're listening, I don't know what you would want to say. But...
Just know that I love you.
We'll link in the show notes your Bandcamp. You don't have any kind of other web... You don't really get on Instagram that much. You had a website and blog. You're an amazing writer. You haven't even talked about that, but like you've had blogs over the years.
I took down my blog because I didn't want to pay for the Squarespace anymore.
Do you have all the writing somewhere?
Yeah, I have all the writing still, and I post writing on my Patreon every once in a while. But
your writing was brilliant. To me, I don't know. I mean, you're looking at me like, but I mean, even back in college, I was like, wow.
I love writing. I mean, I feel like the reason that I love telling stories is the same reason that I love writing. I love the way that we can weave and communicate. So you can listen to literally all of my music on Bandcamp for free. And if you want to buy it, you can. You can also download it for $0 and Venmo me whatever you want. Let's go now. Let's go outside.
I gotta... Yeah. Well, this was really fun, and yeah, but a lot of memory lane stuff going on. That was really awesome to kind of take a 10-year plus reflection.
Mm-hmm.
focused on your life and where you're at and your journey, but it inevitably like makes me reflect on mine because I've known you that long and we have had different versions of relating over the years, so it was cool. It was like a really like check in the mid-30s. Maybe we'll do another one when we're 50. We'll see.
Yeah, let's schedule that now.
We'll be even more pessimistic then. No. As we see other people doing it, we're like, we'll never be like that. But well, yeah, let's get outside right now and do something else.
Hey y'all, you just listened to a conversation with Ted Packard. The intro music for this episode was Around This Corner by Ted Packard himself. The interstitial music was called The Fox Song by Momentary Prophets, and this outro song, which you are currently listening to, is called Ungulating. And also wanting to let y'all know that Ted is putting out a new album any moment now. You can check his Bandcamp page, linked in the show notes, to find his new and old music. And I hope you listen through this last song, and I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ted. Until next time,